You've probably heard Rahab's name mentioned in church or seen her listed in Jesus' genealogy, but do you really know her full story? Today, we're uncovering everything about this remarkable woman, from her scandalous profession to her heroic act of faith that saved Joshua's spies. We'll explore how she went from being an outcast in Jericho to becoming one of only 5 women mentioned in Christ's family tree. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Rahab's story is one of the most powerful examples of redemption and transformation in all of Scripture. But before we begin, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means we can continue producing more content to help you learn something new or unwind. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a community so you can connect with like-minded folks from around the world in the comment section down below. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we? Picture the ancient city of Jericho, rising from the desert floor like a crown of stone and clay. The morning sun casts long shadows across its towering walls, walls that have stood for centuries, watching over the Jordan Valley with quiet strength. Beyond these walls lies a world of merchants and farmers, priests and soldiers, all going about their daily lives beneath the watchful gaze of their gods. But today feels different. Today carries the weight of change in the desert wind. High above the city, on a rooftop that overlooks the eastern horizon, stands a woman. Her name is Rahab, and her story will echo through the ages. She gazes toward the wilderness where dust clouds dance in the distance. More than just another sunrise, this moment marks the beginning of something that will reshape nations. Rahab's hands rest on the warm stone of her window ledge. The scarlet cord hanging there sways gently in the morning breeze, catching the light like liquid fire. She doesn't know yet how this simple piece of fabric will become the thread that weaves her fate into the grand tapestry of history. The city below stirs to life. Merchants call out their wares, children chase each other through narrow streets, and the rhythmic pounding of hammers on metal rings from the blacksmith's forge. At first glance, it may seem like any other day in Jericho, but beneath the surface, tension builds like water behind a dam. Word has spread through the city like wildfire. The Hebrew tribes are moving. After 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, they're finally approaching the promised land. More than just rumors now, these reports come from traders who've seen their camps, from scouts who've watched their movements, from refugees who've fled their advancing armies. Rahab knows these stories well. She's heard them whispered in the marketplace, discussed in hushed tones at the city gates, debated by the elders in the temple courts. The Hebrews' God has done impossible things. He split the sea for them to cross. He fed them in the wilderness. He gave them victory over mighty kings. The woman on the rooftop feels the weight of these tales settling in her chest. Beyond the fear that grips her city, something else stirs within her heart. Call it curiosity, call it hope, or perhaps something deeper that she can't yet name. The God of the Hebrews seems different from the stone idols that fill Jericho's temples. He moves, he acts, he cares for his people. As the day unfolds, Rahab watches the city's daily rhythm continue, but she senses the underlying current of worry that flows beneath the surface. Soldiers patrol the walls more frequently. Merchants speak in lower voices. Mothers hold their children closer. The approaching Hebrew army has cast its shadow over Jericho long before their feet touch the ground. The morning light shifts, painting the walls in shades of gold and amber. Rahab's house sits built into these very walls, its rooms carved from the ancient stones that guard the city. This location has served her well in her trade, providing both privacy and easy access for those who seek her services. But now, this same position places her at the very edge of two worlds. To the west lies everything she's ever known: the temples of Baal and Asherah, the marketplace where she's conducted business for years, the neighbors who've grown familiar with her presence. To the east stretches the unknown, a wilderness that now holds an army unlike any the world has seen. Rahab's life has taught her to read people, to sense their fears and desires. She sees the same expressions on faces throughout the city now. The pursed lips of the wealthy merchants who worry about their trade routes. The furrowed brows of the soldiers who know their walls may not be enough. The hollow eyes of the poor who have nowhere to flee. But something else draws her attention. Among the worry and fear, she notices small acts of kindness. A baker gives extra bread to a hungry child. A woman helps her elderly neighbor carry water. A father tells his son a story to chase away nightmares. Even in the face of approaching danger, the human spirit finds ways to shine. The sun climbs higher, and Rahab retreats from her window, but the images remain with her. The distant dust clouds, the worried faces, the approaching change that will transform everything she's ever known. She doesn't realize it yet, but two men are already making their way toward her city, carrying with them the key to her future. As the first part of her story closes, Rahab stands at the threshold between worlds. Behind her lies a life built on the margins of society, an existence carved out through cunning and survival. Ahead waits a future she cannot imagine, where her choices will ripple through generations, where her faith will be remembered long after the walls of Jericho have crumbled to dust. The scarlet cord continues to dance in the window, a banner of hope against the backdrop of approaching storm. Soon, very soon, everything will change. Jericho, the impenetrable city. Jericho rises from the desert like a monument to human ambition. The city's walls stretch toward the sky, built in layers over countless generations. Inner walls tower above outer walls, creating a double barrier that has never been breached. These fortifications have earned Jericho its reputation as the impenetrable city, a fortress that laughs at would-be conquerors. The builders of ancient times knew their craft well. They constructed these walls with massive stones, each one fitted perfectly against its neighbors. The outer wall stands 30 feet high and 20 feet thick. Behind it, the inner wall rises even higher, creating a defensive system that seems to mock the very idea of siege warfare. Between these walls, houses cluster like birds in a nest, their inhabitants living literally within the city's protection. More than just stone and mortar, Jericho represents the pinnacle of Canaanite civilization. The city controls the crossing points of the Jordan River, making it a natural hub for trade and commerce. Caravans from Egypt carry gold and spices through its gates. Merchants from Damascus bring fine textiles and precious metals. The wealth of nations flows through Jericho's streets like a river of prosperity. The marketplace buzzes with activity from dawn to dusk. Vendors call out in half a dozen languages, their voices creating a symphony of commerce. The scent of roasting meat mingles with the perfume of exotic spices. Children dart between the stalls, their laughter mixing with the haggling of their parents. Beyond the immediate chaos, the market operates with the smooth efficiency of long practice. At the heart of the city stands the temple complex, dedicated to Baal and Asherah. These ancient gods have watched over Jericho for generations, their stone faces gazing down on the offerings and sacrifices made in their honor. The priests move through their rituals with practiced grace, their chants echoing off the temple walls. The people believe these gods have made their city strong, that divine favor rests upon their walls. But beneath this confidence, cracks begin to show. The king of Jericho has called for extra patrols along the walls. His scouts bring troubling reports from the eastern wilderness. The Hebrew tribes are no longer just a distant threat. They've crossed the Jordan River, their camps now visible from the highest towers. The impossible has begun to seem possible. The political climate grows tense as news arrives daily. Messengers bring word of cities that have fallen to the Hebrew advance. Ai, once thought secure, now lies in ruins. The people of Gibeon have made peace with the invaders rather than face destruction. Each report sends ripples of unease through Jericho's population. King Rahab's palace sits at the city's highest point, its towers offering a clear view of the surrounding countryside. From these heights, the king and his advisors can see the dust clouds that mark the Hebrew encampments. They can count the cooking fires that dot the wilderness at night. They can measure the growing shadow that creeps closer to their walls with each passing day. The city's military commanders gather in urgent council. They speak of strategies and defenses, of the strength of their walls and the courage of their soldiers, but their voices carry an edge of worry that wasn't there before. The Hebrew God has done things that defy explanation. He has given victories where victory seemed impossible. He has turned the natural world itself into a weapon for his people. Among the common people, fear spreads like ripples in a pond. Mothers whisper prayers to their household gods. Fathers check and recheck the locks on their doors. Children sense the tension in their parents' voices, even when the words are meant to comfort. The city that once felt like an impenetrable fortress now seems like a trap waiting to be sprung. Yet life continues its familiar patterns. The bakers still bake their bread. The potters still shape their clay. The merchants still count their coins. The human spirit adapts to uncertainty, finding ways to carry on even when the future remains clouded in shadow. People gather in small groups, sharing news and rumors, offering comfort where they can. The spiritual atmosphere grows heavy with tension. The priests increase their offerings, hoping to secure divine favor. The people bring their most precious possessions to the temple, seeking protection from the gods who have always watched over them. But the stone faces of Baal and Asherah remain silent, offering no clear answers to the questions that plague the city. As evening falls, the walls of Jericho stand as magnificent as ever. The guards take their positions, their spears gleaming in the torchlight. The gates close with their usual solid thud, sealing the city for the night. But tonight feels different. Tonight, the walls seem less like protection and more like prison bars. The impenetrable city sleeps uneasily, its dreams troubled by visions of approaching change. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new fears, new questions without easy answers. But tonight, the walls still stand, and the people still believe in their strength. In the darkness between the walls, in a house that bridges the gap between safety and danger, a woman named Rahab lies awake. She listens to the sounds of the city settling into sleep, the distant calls of the night watch, the whisper of wind through the stones. She doesn't know it yet, but her life is about to intersect with forces that will reshape the world. The impenetrable city waits for dawn, unaware that its greatest test approaches with the morning light, Rahab's life before the spies. Rahab's life unfolds in the spaces between respectability and survival, carved out through necessity and maintained through careful balance. Her house sits built into the city wall itself, its rooms formed from the ancient stones that guard Jericho. This location serves her well, providing privacy for her work while keeping her close to the travelers and merchants who frequent the city. The morning light filters through her windows as she prepares for another day. Her hands move with practiced efficiency, arranging her small home to welcome the visitors who will come seeking her services. The scarlet cord hangs from her window like a banner, a sign that those who know can recognize. More than just decoration, it represents her place in the complex web of Jericho's society. Her profession carries both privilege and shame in equal measure. The men who visit her house treat her with a mixture of desire and disdain. They need what she offers, but they despise themselves for the needing. She has learned to read their faces, to understand their moods, to give them what they seek while protecting something essential within herself. The women of the city regard her with complicated emotions. Some look down on her with righteous disapproval, crossing to the other side of the street when they see her coming. Others offer subtle nods of understanding, recognizing the limited choices available to women in their world. A few even seek her out quietly, asking for advice about matters they can't discuss with anyone else. Rahab has developed a reputation for discretion. The merchants who visit her house know their secrets will remain safe. The soldiers who seek her company trust her with their fears and doubts. The traveling dignitaries who require her services rely on her silence. This discretion has become her most valuable asset, worth more than gold or silver. But her life extends beyond her profession. She supports her family through her work, providing for aging parents and younger siblings who depend on her income. The money she earns keeps food on their table and a roof over their heads. Without her sacrifice, they would face the harsh realities of poverty that plague so many in the ancient world. The marketplace knows her as a shrewd negotiator. She buys the best flax for spinning, understanding quality in ways that other customers cannot match. The vendors respect her business sense, even if they question her morals. She pays her debts promptly and drives hard bargains, earning grudging admiration from those who deal with her. Her daily routine follows patterns established over years of practice. She rises early to prepare her household, spending time with her family before the day's work begins. She visits the market to buy food and supplies, moving through the familiar stalls with confidence. She maintains her home with careful attention, understanding that her livelihood depends on creating the right atmosphere for her visitors. The city's religious life flows around her like a river around a stone. She observes the festivals and makes the required offerings, but something within her remains unsatisfied. The gods of Jericho demand much, but seem to give little in return. Their stone faces offer no comfort, no real connection, no sense of purpose beyond the immediate needs of survival. At night, when her work is done and the city settles into sleep, Rahab often finds herself at her window. She looks out over the walls toward the wilderness beyond, wondering what lies in the darkness. The stars above seem to whisper of possibilities she cannot name, of purposes greater than the narrow confines of her current existence. Her neighbors maintain a careful distance. They tolerate her presence because she causes no trouble and keeps to herself. Some even benefit from her discretion, grateful of her willingness to remain silent about the indiscretions they witness. But true friendship remains elusive, a luxury her position cannot afford. The city's power structure acknowledges her existence without welcoming her participation. The priests ignore her unless they need something. The merchants use her services but don't invite her into their circles. The nobles treat her as a necessary evil, tolerated but never accepted. She exists in the margins, useful but not valued. Yet within these constraints, Rahab has built a life of quiet dignity. She treats her visitors with respect, regardless of their station. She maintains her home with pride, creating beauty where she can. She cares for her family with devotion, ensuring their needs are met even at the cost of her own comfort. Her reputation extends beyond the city walls. Travelers speak of her in other cities, describing her as a woman of intelligence and discretion. Merchants include her house in their mental maps of Jericho, marking it as a place of safety and comfort. This wider recognition gives her a measure of security that purely local acceptance could never provide. The approaching Hebrew army has begun to affect her business. Fewer travelers visit the city, and those who do come seem more nervous and hurried. The local men who seek her services bring their fears with them, speaking of rumors and possibilities that chill the blood. The very air seems charged with tension, as if the world itself holds its breath. Rahab senses that change approaches like a storm on the horizon. The familiar patterns of her life may soon be disrupted by forces beyond her control. The gods she has served seem powerless before the Hebrew advance. The walls that have protected her city may not be enough to hold back the tide of change. But she continues her daily routine, maintaining the careful balance that has sustained her for so long. She doesn't know that her life is about to intersect with destiny itself, that her choices will echo through generations, that her name will be remembered long after the walls of Jericho have crumbled to dust. The woman who lives between worlds prepares for another day, unaware that this day will be unlike any other in her life. The arrival of the spies. The two men approach Jericho as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon. They move with the practiced caution of those who have learned to read danger in every shadow, every sound, every shift in the wind. Their clothes mark them as ordinary travelers, but their eyes carry the sharp awareness of trained scouts. Joshua has chosen these men carefully. They possess the skills needed for such a delicate mission, the ability to gather information without drawing attention to themselves. The fate of the coming siege may well depend on what they learn within Jericho's walls. More than just reconnaissance, their mission carries the weight of divine command. The city gates stand open to receive the day's final visitors. Guards examine each traveler with routine efficiency, checking for weapons and asking perfunctory questions about their business. The spies blend seamlessly with the small crowd of merchants and pilgrims seeking entrance before nightfall. Their answers satisfy the guards, who have no reason to suspect these particular strangers. Inside the city, the two men separate to begin their work. They move through the streets with apparent aimlessness, but their eyes catalog every detail. They note the positions of the guards, the thickness of the walls, the layout of the streets. They listen to conversations in the marketplace, gathering intelligence about the city's defenses and the morale of its people. As darkness falls, they face a crucial decision: where to spend the night. Their choice will determine not just their safety, but the success of their entire mission. A respectable inn might offer comfort, but it would also place them under scrutiny. The wrong word, the wrong gesture, could expose them as Hebrew spies. One of the men remembers something he heard in the marketplace. A merchant mentioned a woman who provides lodging for travelers, a woman whose house sits built into the city wall. The location appeals to them immediately. A house in the wall would offer multiple escape routes if their mission is discovered, and a woman in her profession would be accustomed to discretion. They make their way through the darkening streets, following the merchant's directions. The narrow lanes twist and turn, leading them deeper into the residential areas where the wealthy merchants have their homes. But they seek the section where the wall itself provides shelter, where the city's defenses become part of its living spaces. Rahab's house appears before them like an answer to an unspoken prayer. Light glows warmly from its windows, and the scarlet cord hanging from the upper story confirms that they have found their destination. They approach the door with the casual confidence of ordinary travelers, but their hearts beat with the rhythm of men whose lives depend on the next few moments. The woman who opens the door studies them with intelligent eyes. She has learned to read men quickly, to assess their needs and their dangers with a glance. These two carry themselves differently from her usual visitors. They move with the fluid grace of warriors, but they wear the clothes of merchants. Their faces show the weathering of long travel, but their eyes hold the alertness of those who live always on guard. Rahab makes her decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She steps aside to let them enter, her manner welcoming but cautious. The men step across her threshold, passing from the public spaces of the city into the private world of her home. Neither side fully trusts the other, but circumstance has brought them together. Inside, the spies find exactly what they hoped for. The house sits built into the wall itself, its upper rooms offering views of both the city and the countryside beyond. The woman speaks softly and moves with quiet efficiency, clearly experienced in providing for travelers who value discretion. The arrangement seems perfect for their needs. But even as they settle into their temporary refuge, danger begins to close around them. Someone in the city has sharp eyes and a good memory. Someone has noticed that strangers entered Jericho today, strangers whose manner didn't quite match their appearance. Word begins to spread through the network of informers that serves the king's intelligence. The spies don't know it yet, but their careful entrance has not gone unnoticed. The very skills that help them pass the gates have also marked them as different from ordinary travelers. In a city on edge, difference equals danger. The king's men have begun to ask questions, to follow leads, to piece together the puzzle of two men who appeared at just the wrong time. As the night deepens, the spies begin their work in earnest. They question their hostess carefully, learning what they can about the city's defenses and the morale of its people. Rahab proves to be a valuable source of information, her position in the city giving her access to knowledge that ordinary citizens would never possess. The conversation reveals more than military intelligence. The spies learn about the fear that grips the city, the way the Hebrew advance has shaken the confidence of Jericho's people. They hear about the discussions among the city's leaders, the debates about whether to fight or flee. Most importantly, they begin to understand that the psychological battle has already been won. But as they talk, footsteps echo in the street outside. Voices call out in the darkness, the commanding tones of soldiers on official business. The spies freeze, their trained instincts screaming warnings. They have been discovered. The safety they thought they had found may be about to disappear. Rahab moves to the window, her face pale in the lamplight. She recognizes the voices, knows the danger they represent. In moments, those soldiers will be at her door, demanding answers she cannot give without betraying her guests. The choice that will define her life approaches with the sound of marching feet. The spies prepare for the worst, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. They have faced death before, but never in circumstances quite like these. Their mission hangs in the balance, and with it, the fate of the coming siege. Everything depends on what happens in the next few minutes. The arrival of the spies has set in motion a chain of events that will reshape the world. But first, they must survive the night. The king's men hunt the spies. The king's informants move through Jericho like shadows, their trained eyes seeing patterns that ordinary citizens miss. Word has reached the palace that strangers entered the city today, men whose manner marked them as different from typical travelers. In a city balanced on the edge of war, such differences cannot be ignored. The captain of the guard reviews the reports with growing concern. Two men, traveling together but carrying themselves like soldiers rather than merchants. They asked the right questions and gave the right answers, but something about them felt wrong to those who observed them. Their clothes spoke of trade, but their eyes spoke of warfare. King Rahab's intelligence network has served the city well for years. Merchants, innkeepers, and gate guards all contribute information about the strangers who pass through their domain. This system has protected Jericho from spies and saboteurs many times before. Tonight it points toward two men who may represent the greatest threat the city has ever faced. The search begins systematically. Guards visit the established inns, questioning the proprietors about their guests. Thus, they search the caravanserais where traveling merchants typically lodge. They check the homes of citizens known to provide hospitality to strangers. Each location yields nothing, but the absence of evidence only confirms their suspicions. The captain narrows his search based on logic and experience. If these men are truly Hebrew spies, they would avoid the obvious places. They would seek lodging somewhere discreet, somewhere their presence wouldn't be immediately reported to the authorities. They would choose a location that offered escape routes and a hostess who valued discretion above loyalty to the crown. His thoughts turned to the houses built into the city wall. These structures offer unique advantages to those who need to move unseen. Their proximity to the wall provides multiple escape routes. Their residents often operate outside the mainstream of city life, making them less likely to cooperate with official investigations. If he were a spy, he would choose exactly such a place. The mental map of potential locations comes together quickly. Several houses in the wall section cater to travelers, but one stands out above the rest. Rahab's house has long been known as a place where questions aren't asked and secrets are kept. The woman who lives there has built her reputation on discretion, making her home an ideal refuge for those who need to remain hidden. The captain calls for his most trusted soldiers. These men have served with him for years, their loyalty proven in countless situations. They understand the delicate nature of their mission. If the spies are indeed at Rahab's house, they must be taken alive, if possible. Dead men tell no tales, and the king needs information about Hebrew plans and capabilities. As the soldiers prepare for their mission, messengers carry word throughout the city. The gates are to be sealed immediately, preventing any escape. Extra guards are posted on the walls, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of unusual activity. The city transforms itself into a trap, ready to snap shut on any who would try to flee. The squad moves through the dark streets with practiced silence. They know these lanes and alleys like the rooms of their own homes. Every shadow holds potential danger. Every sound might signal an ambush. The Hebrew spies have proven themselves capable of entering the city undetected. They may prove equally capable of defending themselves if cornered. At Rahab's house, the soldiers pause to assess the situation. Light glows from the windows, but the building appears quiet. No sentries are posted, no obvious preparations for defense are visible. Either the spies are supremely confident in their concealment, or they have no idea that their presence has been discovered. The captain signals his men to surround the building. They move into position with the smooth coordination of long practice. Within moments, every potential exit is covered. If the Hebrew spies are indeed inside, they will find no easy escape from the trap that is closed around them. The tension builds as the soldiers prepare to make their move. They have faced many dangers in service to their king, but tonight feels different. Tonight, they hunt men who serve the God who split the sea and fed his people in the wilderness. The stories of Hebrew victories have reached even the palace guards, filling their hearts with unease. But duty drives them forward despite their fears. They serve the king of Jericho, and that service demands they protect the city from all threats. The Hebrew spies represent the most immediate danger the city has faced in years. Their capture or elimination could buy precious time for the defense preparations. The captain approaches the door with his hand resting on his sword hilt. Behind him, his soldiers stand ready for whatever may come. The next few moments will determine whether their mission succeeds or fails. The fate of two nations may hang in the balance of what happens when that door opens. Inside the house, Rahab hears the approaching footsteps and recognizes their meaning. The soldiers have come for her guests, and she must choose between the safety of compliance and the risk of defiance. Her decision will echo through history, but in this moment, she knows only that lives hang in the balance. The knock comes at the door, firm and commanding. The captain's voice rings out in the darkness, demanding entrance in the name of the king. The hunt for the spies has reached its climax. Now comes the moment of truth, the deception. The pounding on Rahab's door echoes through the night like the beating of a war drum. She recognizes the authority in that sound, the unmistakable demand of soldiers acting on the king's orders. Her guests freeze in the lamplight, their faces reflecting the gravity of their situation. In moments, she must choose between her own safety and the lives of these strangers. The captain's voice carries through the wooden door, formal and impatient. Open in the name of the king. We seek two men who entered the city today, men suspected of being Hebrew spies. We have reason to believe they may be in your house. Rahab's mind races through the possibilities. She could surrender her guests immediately, claiming ignorance of their true purpose. Such cooperation would protect her from the king's wrath and might even earn her a reward. But something deeper than calculation stays her hand. These men have placed their lives in her keeping, and she cannot simply hand them over to their fate. The spies prepare for the worst, their hands moving toward their weapons. They have faced death before, but never while trapped in a stranger's house with no clear avenue of escape. Their mission hangs in the balance, and with it, the success of the coming siege. Everything depends on what their hostess chooses to do in the next few moments. But Rahab has already made her decision. She moves with swift purpose, gesturing for the spies to follow her. The house built into the wall offers advantages that ordinary buildings cannot provide. She leads them to the roof, where bundles of flax lie drying in the night air. The stalks provide perfect concealment for two men who need to become invisible. The spies understand immediately. They burrow into the flax like hunters hiding in tall grass, their trained bodies finding positions that minimize their profile. The dried stalks close over them, transforming them from visible threats into hidden shadows. Years of military training have prepared them for exactly this kind of concealment. Rahab arranges the flax carefully, ensuring that no sign of disturbance is visible. Her hands work with practiced efficiency, but her heart pounds with the rhythm of fear and determination. She has committed herself to a course of action that could cost her everything. There is no turning back now. The pounding at the door grows more insistent. The captain's patience has limits, and those limits are approaching quickly. Rahab smooths her clothing and composes her features, preparing to give the performance of her life. Everything depends on her ability to convince these soldiers that she knows nothing of any spies. She opens the door with the careful balance of cooperation and confusion. Her expression suggests a woman awakened from sleep, slightly disoriented but willing to help. The soldiers push past her into the house, their eyes scanning every corner and shadow. They move with the thoroughness of men who have searched many buildings and know how to find what they seek. Yes, Rahab says, her voice carrying just the right note of remembrance. Two men did come to me today. They came as the city gates were closing, seeking lodging for the night. I provided them with food and shelter, as is my custom with travelers. The captain studies her face, looking for signs of deception. He has questioned many people over the years and has learned to read the subtle signs of guilt and fear. But Rahab's expression remains steady, her manner suggesting nothing more than a citizen's desire to cooperate with authority. "Where are they now?" he demands, his voice sharp with suspicion. Rahab spreads her hands in a gesture of ignorance. "I don't know where they came from or where they were going. They left before the gates closed for the night. If you hurry, you may catch them on the road toward the Jordan fords." The lie flows from her lips like water from a pitcher. She has learned to read men well in her profession, understanding what they want to hear and how to present information in ways that serve her purposes. Tonight, those skills may save lives. The soldiers search the house thoroughly, their trained eyes examining every possible hiding place. They check the rooms, the storage areas, the spaces beneath the stairs. They find nothing suspicious, nothing that suggests the presence of Hebrew spies. The house appears exactly as it should, the home of a woman who provides services to travelers. But the captain remains unconvinced. Something about the situation feels wrong, though he cannot identify exactly what troubles him. Perhaps it is the woman's apparent calm, or the way her story fits together too neatly. Perhaps it is simply the tension that fills the air whenever the Hebrew advance is mentioned. "You're certain they left before the gates closed?" He presses, studying her reaction carefully. "Absolutely certain," Rahab replies without hesitation. "They were anxious to continue their journey. They spoke of needing to reach the Jordan crossing before dawn. I assumed they had urgent business waiting for them." The captain weighs her words against his instincts. The story makes sense, but spies would naturally try to leave the city quickly after completing their mission. The timing could be coincidental, or it could be exactly what one would expect from Hebrew scouts gathering intelligence about Jericho's defenses. Time becomes a factor in his decision. If the spies have indeed left the city, every moment spent in continued searching allows them to travel farther from pursuit. The fords of the Jordan are only a few hours' ride away. Once the spies cross the river, they will be beyond reach, safely among their own people. "Show me the room where they stayed," he orders, making one final attempt to uncover evidence of their presence. Rahab leads him to the guest chamber, a simple room furnished with sleeping mats and a small table. The space shows signs of recent occupation, but nothing that specifically identifies Hebrew spies. The captain examines the room carefully, looking for anything that might betray the true identity of its recent occupants. He finds nothing definitive. The room appears exactly as it should after hosting two ordinary travelers. Whatever evidence might have existed has been either removed or expertly concealed. The woman has maintained her story consistently, and the physical evidence supports her account. The captain makes his decision. "If you're lying to me, woman, you'll answer to the king himself. But if these men have truly left the city, we're wasting precious time. Every moment we delay allows them to travel farther from our reach." He signals his men to prepare for departure. The chase must begin immediately if there is any hope of catching the spies before they reach safety. The soldiers file out of the house with disciplined efficiency, their minds already focused on the pursuit that lies ahead. As the last soldier disappears into the darkness, Rahab closes the door and leans against it. Her hands tremble slightly as the full weight of what she has done settles upon her. She has deceived the king's men, lied to their faces, and sent them chasing shadows into the night. The consequences of discovery would be severe beyond imagination. But above the fear, she feels something else, a sense of rightness, of having made a choice that aligns with purposes greater than her own immediate safety. The God of the Hebrews has somehow used her to protect his servants. She has become part of a story much larger than herself. The deception has succeeded, but the night is far from over. The real challenge still lies ahead. Rahab's bargain. The sound of the soldier's footsteps fades into the distance, leaving behind a silence that feels heavy with possibility. Rahab remains by the door, her ear pressed to the wood, listening for any sign that the patrol might return. Only when she is certain they have truly gone does she allow herself to move away from the entrance. She climbs to the roof where the two spies remain hidden beneath the dried flax. The stalks rustle softly as the men emerge from their concealment, their faces reflecting relief and wariness in equal measure. They have survived the immediate danger, but they understand that their situation remains precarious. "The soldiers have gone," Rahab whispers, her voice barely audible in the night air. "They believe you have fled the city and crossed the Jordan. They ride toward the fords even now, chasing shadows while you remain hidden in safety." The spies exchange glances, recognizing the magnitude of what this woman has done for them. She has risked everything to protect strangers, defying her own king's direct orders. Such courage deserves acknowledgement, but more than that, it demands explanation. Why? Asks the older of the two men, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Why did you risk your life for us? You could have handed us over to the soldiers and earned their gratitude. Instead, you chose to face the king's wrath if your deception is discovered. Rahab moves to the edge of the roof, her eyes scanning the darkness that surrounds her city. The walls of Jericho stretch away in both directions, massive and imposing in the starlight. But tonight, those walls feel less like protection and more like a trap waiting to be sprung. I know who you are, she says softly, her words carrying the weight of certainty. You are servants of the God who brought your people out of Egypt with mighty signs and wonders. We have heard the stories, all of us in Jericho. Your God dried up the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt. He gave you victory over the kings beyond the Jordan. The spies listen carefully, understanding that this conversation will shape everything that follows. This woman knows more than they expected, and her knowledge carries implications that extend far beyond their immediate mission. The fear of your God has fallen upon us, Rahab continues, her voice growing stronger with each word. The hearts of our people melt with terror because of you. No courage remains in any man throughout the city. Your Lord God is the true God, the God of heaven above and earth beneath. These words strike the spies with unexpected force. They have come to gather intelligence about Jericho's defenses, but instead they have found something far more valuable. The psychological victory has already been won. The city's spirit has been broken before the first arrow is shot or the first stone is thrown. But Rahab has more to say. She turns to face them fully, her expression serious and determined. Now therefore I beg you, swear to me by your Lord God that since I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my family. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them. The bargain she proposes is simple in its essence, but profound in its implications. She has saved their lives at great personal risk. Now she asks them to save the lives of those she holds most dear. The exchange of mercy for mercy, protection for protection. The older spy considers her request carefully. He has the authority to make such agreements, but he must ensure that any promise he makes can be honored when the time comes. The destruction of Jericho is ordained by God himself, but provision for mercy has always been part of the divine plan. Our lives for your lives, he says finally, his voice carrying the solemnity of an oath. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. But the agreement requires conditions, safeguards that will protect both parties when the city falls. The spies cannot guarantee the safety of people they cannot identify, and Rahab must understand the precise terms of their arrangement. When we come into the land, the younger spy adds, you must bind this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. Gather your father and mother, your brothers, and all your father's household into your house with you. The scarlet cord becomes more than just a rope for escape. It transforms into a banner of protection, a sign that will mark this house as different from all others when judgment falls upon the city. More than mere identification, it represents the covenant between Rahab and the God of Israel. Whoever goes out of the doors of your house into the street will be responsible for his own blood, the older spy explains, ensuring she understands the gravity of the conditions. We will be innocent of his death, but if anyone who is with you in the house is harmed, his blood will be on our head. The terms are clear and specific. Safety exists only within the marked house, only for those who choose to trust in the protection offered by the Hebrew God. The scarlet cord will serve as both beacon and boundary, marking the place where mercy triumphs over judgment. Rahab accepts these conditions without hesitation. The bargain offers hope where none existed before, a chance for survival in the face of certain destruction. According to your words, so be it, she says, sealing the agreement with her consent. The weight of what has transpired settles upon all three of them. They have formed an alliance that transcends the boundaries of nation and culture, A Canaanite woman and two Hebrew spies have found common ground in their recognition of divine power and their mutual need for mercy. The night air carries the distant sounds of the city, settling into sleep. Guards call out their positions on the walls, dogs bark in the distance. The normal rhythms of life continue, unaware that history has been made on this rooftop. A covenant has been struck that will echo through generations. Rahab looks at the scarlet cord in her hand, understanding that it represents far more than rope. It symbolizes her faith in a God she has never served, her trust in men she barely knows, her hope for a future she cannot fully imagine. The cord will hang in her window as a declaration of allegiance to powers greater than those that ruled Jericho. The bargain has been struck, the terms agreed upon, the conditions accepted. Now comes the difficult part, maintaining faith while waiting for deliverance, keeping hope alive while watching a city prepare for war, trusting in promises while surrounded by those who would consider such trust the ultimate betrayal. The woman who lives between worlds has chosen her side. The men who serve the God of heaven have found an unexpected ally. The stage is set for the drama that will unfold when the walls of Jericho face their greatest test, a woman of faith. The scarlet cord feels different in Rahab's hands now, transformed from simple rope into something sacred. She turns it over slowly, studying its texture and color in the pale starlight. This ordinary piece of fabric has become the thread that connects her to a future she can barely comprehend, a lifeline extending toward the God of Israel. "Tell me about your God," she says quietly, her voice carrying a hunger that surprises even herself. "I want to understand the power that makes mighty kings tremble and causes the waters themselves to obey." The older spy settles more comfortably on the rooftop, recognizing the importance of this moment. This woman risked everything for them, and her questions deserve honest answers. More than that, her interest suggests a spiritual awakening that goes far beyond mere political calculation. "The Lord our God is not like the gods of other nations," he begins, his voice taking on the rhythm of one who has told this story many times. "He does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor does he require offerings of gold and silver to hear the prayers of his people. He is the living God, the creator of heaven and earth." Rahab listens with the intensity of someone hearing water described after years in the desert. The gods of Jericho have always felt distant and demanding, requiring elaborate rituals and costly sacrifices while offering little in return. This God sounds fundamentally different, accessible and caring rather than remote and indifferent. "We were slaves in Egypt for 400 years, the spy continues, his words painting pictures in the darkness. "Our people cried out under the burden of their oppression, and the Lord heard their groaning. He raised up Moses to lead us out, demonstrating his power through signs and wonders that shook the foundations of Pharaoh's kingdom." The stories unfold like flowers blooming in spring, the 10 plagues that brought Egypt to its knees, the night of death that passed over the Hebrew homes while claiming the firstborn of their oppressors, the dramatic escape that led to the shores of the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army in hot pursuit. "We stood at the water's edge with nowhere to run," the younger spy adds, his voice filled with awe, even after all these years. "Behind us came the chariots of Egypt. Before us stretched the impossible barrier of the sea. But Moses stretched out his staff, and the Lord drove back the waters with a strong east wind." Rahab can envision the scene. Walls of water standing like crystal cliffs, the seabed revealed as dry ground, an entire nation walking through on feet that should have been wet but remained dry. Such power defies understanding, yet the evidence of its reality surrounds her even now. "Your people walked through the sea itself?" she asks, her voice filled with wonder. "Every man, woman, and child," the older spy confirms. "Our flocks and herds, our possessions, and our treasures all crossed safely to the other side while the waters stood like walls on our right hand and our left." The image burns itself into Rahab's imagination. She has lived her entire life beside the Jordan River, understanding the power of moving water. The idea of such massive forces held back by divine command stretches her understanding to its limits. Yet, the evidence of Hebrew victories makes the stories impossible to dismiss. "And when your enemies followed you into the sea?" she presses, though she suspects she already knows the answer. The Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw them into confusion, the spy replies, his voice growing solemn. The waters returned and covered the chariots and horsemen of Pharaoh's entire army. Not one of them survived. The silence that follows carries the weight of divine judgment. Rahab understands that she has glimpsed something awesome and terrible, a God who rescues his people and destroys their enemies with equal ease. The implications for her own city settle heavily upon her heart. We spent 40 years in the wilderness, the younger spy continues, learning to trust in the Lord's provision. He fed us with bread from heaven, gave us water from solid rock, and led us with a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Every need was met, every promise fulfilled. These stories reshape Rahab's understanding of divine power. The gods of Jericho demand much but provide little. They require elaborate temples and costly sacrifices while offering uncertain protection and unreliable favor. This Hebrew God seems to delight in caring for his people, meeting their needs without demanding payment they cannot afford. But why are you telling me these things? Rahab asks, though part of her already knows the answer. Why share such sacred stories with a woman like me? The older spy's expression grows gentle in the starlight. Because the Lord our God shows no favoritism between rich and poor, between Hebrew and foreigner, between those born in the covenant and those who choose to enter it. He judges the heart, not the heritage. These words strike Rahab with unexpected force. Throughout her life, she has been defined by her profession, her social status, her place in Jericho's hierarchy. The idea of a God who looks beyond such surface distinctions to examine the heart itself offers hope she never dared to imagine. You speak of choosing to enter the covenant, she says carefully. Could such a choice truly be mine to make? Your choice has already been demonstrated, the younger spy replies with a smile. Tonight, when you chose to protect us rather than betray us, you showed that your heart belongs to the Lord rather than to the gods of Jericho. Your faith has saved not only our lives, but your own soul. The transformation happens gradually, like dawn breaking over the eastern hills. Rahab feels something shift within her spirit, a recognition of truth that goes deeper than mere intellectual understanding. The God of Israel has been drawing her toward himself through the stories she's heard, the fear that has gripped her city, and now through the living testimony of these men. I want to serve your God, she says simply, the words emerging from the deepest part of her being. Whatever it costs, whatever it requires, I want to belong to the Lord rather than to the gods who have never truly seen me. The declaration hangs in the night air like a prayer ascending toward heaven. A woman of Jericho has chosen to place her faith in the God of Israel, crossing lines of culture and nation to embrace a destiny she cannot fully comprehend. The scarlet cord in her hands has become more than a sign of protection. It has become a symbol of covenant, binding her to the God who sees the heart and welcomes all who seek him. The faith that will preserve her life has taken root in her soul, growing strong in the darkness before dawn. The escape plan. The eastern horizon shows the first faint traces of approaching dawn, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and pale gold. Time has become the enemy now, each passing moment bringing the return of full daylight and the increased danger of discovery. The spies must escape Jericho before the city awakens to another day of normal activity. Rahab leads them to the window that faces outward from the city, away from the streets and squares, where early risers might observe their descent. The wall here drops away into a steep ravine, providing natural concealment for those who know how to use it. More than just an escape route, this window offers access to the wilderness where Hebrew forces wait. The scarlet cord in her hands takes on new significance as she prepares to lower the spies to safety. What began as a symbol of her profession will become a banner of protection, marking her house for preservation when judgment falls upon the city. The transformation feels appropriate somehow, ordinary objects becoming sacred through their connection to divine purpose. The cord is strong enough to bear your weight, she assures them, testing its strength with practiced hands. I have used such ropes many times in my work, and this one is newly made from the finest fibers. The older spy examines the rope carefully, understanding that their lives will depend on its reliability. The drop to the bottom of the ravine measures at least 30 feet, far enough to cause serious injury or death if the cord fails. But the hemp appears well made and strong, woven with the skill that marks the best Canaanite craftsmanship. When you reach the ground, Rahab continues, her voice low but clear, follow the ravine toward the wilderness. It will lead you away from the main roads where the king's soldiers might be patrolling. Stay hidden during the day and travel only at night until you reach your own people. The younger spy nods his understanding. They have memorized the routes they would need to take if their mission went badly, but local knowledge always proves valuable. This woman's guidance could save them hours of dangerous travel time. 3 days, the older spy says, repeating the instructions they gave her earlier. Hide yourselves in the hills for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then you may go on your way safely. The timing is crucial. The soldiers who left the city in pursuit of phantom spies will need time to search the Jordan crossings and return to report their failure. Only when the immediate hunt has ended will the real spies be able to move safely through the countryside toward their own lines. Rahab secures one end of the cord to a heavy beam that runs across her window frame. The wood has been seasoned by years of desert sun and wind, making it strong enough to anchor the rope without fear of breaking. She tests the knot with sharp tugs, ensuring that it will hold under the stress of supporting a man's full weight. Remember the conditions of our agreement, the older spy says as he prepares to descend. When we return with our army, bind this same cord in the window. Gather all your family into your house and keep them there. Anyone who goes outside will be beyond our protection. The instructions carry the weight of life and death. Rahab nods solemnly, understanding that the success of their bargain depends on her ability to follow these directions exactly. The scarlet cord must hang in the window as a sign. Her family must remain within the house. The terms are simple but absolutely critical. What if they refuse to come? She asks, voicing a fear that has been growing in her heart. What if my family chooses not to believe that your God will preserve them? What if they prefer to trust in Jericho's walls rather than in your promises? The question reflects a deeper concern than mere family dynamics. Rahab has made a choice to place her faith in the Hebrew God, but that choice cannot be imposed upon others. Each person must decide for themselves whether to trust in stone walls or divine protection, whether to rely on human strength or supernatural mercy. You can only offer them the choice, the younger spy replies gently. The Lord never forces faith upon unwilling hearts, but those who choose to trust in his protection will find that his promises never fail. The first spy begins his descent, moving with the practiced ease of a soldier accustomed to dangerous climbs. The rope bears his weight without complaint, and he disappears quickly into the shadows of the ravine below. Within moments, his soft whistle signals that he has reached the ground safely. The second spy pauses at the window, looking back at the woman who has saved their lives. The Lord our God will remember your kindness, he says simply. Your name will be spoken with honor among our people for generations to come. Then he too disappears over the sill, sliding down the cord with military efficiency. The soft scrape of his feet against the wall mingles with the distant sounds of the awakening city. A dog barks somewhere in the darkness. A rooster calls out the approaching dawn. Normal life continues, unaware that history has been made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Rahab watches until both men vanish into the wilderness, their dark forms swallowed by the broken terrain that surrounds Jericho. The mission that brought them to her door has been completed successfully. They carry with them not only intelligence about the city's defenses, but also the knowledge that fear has already conquered Jericho's spirit. She pulls the rope back up and coils it carefully, understanding that this same cord will soon hang in her window as a banner of hope. The scarlet color that once marked her profession will become a symbol of divine mercy, visible proof that the God of Israel extends his protection to all who seek it. The escape plan has succeeded, but Rahab's greatest challenge still lies ahead. She must convince her family to trust in promises they cannot see, to place their faith in a God they have never served, to believe that their survival depends on remaining in a house marked for preservation while the city around them falls. Dawn breaks over Jericho as the woman who chose faith over fear prepares for the most difficult conversation of her life. The spies return to Joshua. The two spies move through the wilderness like shadows given flesh, their training evident in every step and gesture. 3 days they remain hidden in the rocky hills that surround Jericho and is watching the dust clouds raised by the king's soldiers as they search the Jordan crossings for men who were never there. Only when the pursuit turns back toward the city do they begin their own journey home. The landscape they traverse tells the story of divine preparation. Springs of fresh water appear exactly where they need them. Natural shelter presents itself when the desert sun grows too fierce. Game trails lead them safely around the camps of hostile tribes. Every detail speaks of a God who goes before his people, preparing their way. The Hebrew camp spreads across the plains like a vast city of tents and banners. Smoke rises from countless cooking fires, and the sounds of daily life create a familiar symphony of home. After days of moving through enemy territory, the sight of their own people brings relief that goes deeper than words can express. Joshua's tent stands at the center of the encampment, marked by the banners that identify it as the place where Israel's leader conducts the business of war and governance. Guards recognize the returning spies immediately, their faces reflecting the relief of men who feared these scouts might never return from their dangerous mission. "Bring them to Joshua immediately," the captain of the guard commands. The leader of Israel has been waiting for their report since the day they left for Jericho. The spies make their way through the familiar bustle of the camp, greeting friends and fellow soldiers with quiet nods. Their mission has succeeded beyond all expectations, but the full implications of what they learned will only become clear when they share their intelligence with Israel's commander. Joshua looks up from the maps spread across his table as the two men enter his tent. His face shows the strain of a leader carrying the weight of an entire nation's future. The conquest of Jericho represents more than just another military victory. It will establish Israel's foothold in the Promised Land and demonstrate God's faithfulness to his covenant promises. "Report," Joshua says simply, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to command. The older spy steps forward, his words careful and precise. "We have seen the land, and indeed the Lord has given all of it into our hands. The people of Jericho melt with fear because of us." These opening words carry implications that go far beyond military intelligence. The psychological battle has already been won. The reputation of Israel's God has preceded them into Canaan, breaking the spirit of resistance before the first arrow is shot. "Tell me about their defenses," Joshua commands, leaning forward with intense concentration. The younger spy provides the details their leader needs. "The walls are strong, built in layers with massive stones. The outer wall stands 30 feet high and 20 feet thick. The inner wall rises even higher. But the people behind those walls have lost their courage." The military analysis continues with professional thoroughness: guard positions, weak points in the fortifications, the layout of the streets, the location of the king's palace. Every detail that might prove useful in the coming siege is cataloged and explained. But the most significant intelligence has nothing to do with stone and mortar. "The fear of our God has fallen upon them," the older spy continues. "They have heard about our escape from Egypt, about the miracles in the wilderness, about our victories over the kings beyond the Jordan. Their hearts melt like wax before fire." Joshua absorbs this information with the satisfaction of a commander whose strategy has already achieved its primary objective. Terror is often more effective than siege engines in bringing down enemy strongholds. An army that has lost its will to fight has already lost the battle. "What of the people themselves?" Joshua asks. "Are they united in their resistance, or do divisions exist that we might exploit?" The spies exchange glances, remembering the woman who saved their lives. "We found an ally within the city," the older spy reports carefully. "A woman named Rahab who showed us kindness and protected us from the king's soldiers. She has expressed faith in our God and requested mercy for herself and her family when the city falls." The request for mercy presents no problems for Joshua. The God of Israel has always made provision for those who choose to join themselves to his people. Ruth the Moabite, Caleb the Kenizzite, and countless others have found acceptance among the tribes of Israel through their faith rather than their heritage. "What promises did you make to this woman?" Joshua inquires, understanding that any agreements made in his name must be honored when the time comes. "We swore to spare her life and the lives of her family members if she fulfills certain conditions," the younger spy explains. "She must bind a scarlet cord in her window as a sign, and she must gather all her relatives into her house during the attack. Anyone who ventures outside will be beyond our protection." Joshua nods his approval. The terms are reasonable and consistent with divine justice. Those who choose to trust in God's mercy will find that mercy available. Those who reject it will face the consequences of their choice. "The woman's house is built into the wall itself," the older spy adds. "The scarlet cord will be easily visible to our forces when the assault begins. Her location should present no difficulty for identification and protection." The intelligence report concludes with strategic recommendations based on their observations. The city's morale is broken, its people paralyzed by fear. A swift, decisive assault will likely succeed where a prolonged siege might allow the defenders time to recover their courage. But Joshua has already received his orders from a higher authority. The conquest of Jericho will follow God's plan rather than conventional military wisdom. The walls will fall not through human strength but through divine power, demonstrating to all nations that Israel serves the living God. "Your mission has succeeded beyond all expectations," Joshua tells the two spies. "You have confirmed that the Lord has indeed given this land into our hands. The people of Jericho know that their gods cannot protect them from the power of our God." The spies receive their commander's praise with the quiet satisfaction of men who have completed a difficult task successfully. They have gathered intelligence that will prove invaluable in the coming campaign. More than that, they have seen firsthand evidence that God goes before his people, preparing their victory through the fears and faith of their enemies. As they leave Joshua's tent, the two men carry with them the knowledge that they have participated in something greater than mere military reconnaissance. They have witnessed the power of divine reputation, seen how the glory of God's past actions shapes the possibilities of future conquest. The stage is set for the most unusual siege in military history, a campaign that will demonstrate divine power rather than human strength, where walls will fall to trumpets rather than battering rams. The spies have returned with confirmation that the Lord has given Jericho into Israel's hands. Now comes the time to claim that promise. The Israelite advance. The morning light danced across the Jordan River, casting golden ripples that seemed to whisper ancient promises. Joshua stood at the water's edge, his weathered hands gripping the staff that had guided his people through countless wanderings. Behind him, the vast multitude of Israel stretched across the plains like a living sea of hope and determination. The river before them flowed with unusual force that spring. Winter rains had swollen its banks, transforming the normally manageable crossing into a rushing torrent that seemed to mock any attempt at passage. Yet Joshua felt no fear. The same God who had parted the Red Sea decades earlier now called them forward into their promised inheritance. The priests carrying the sacred ark stepped into the muddy banks first. Their bare feet touched the cool water, and something extraordinary began to unfold. The rushing waters that had roared downstream suddenly grew quiet. Upstream, the river began to pile upon itself, creating a wall of water that defied all natural law. The riverbed below their feet transformed into dry ground, as if the earth itself welcomed their passage. Words spread through the camp like wildfire. Children pointed in wonder at the miracle unfolding before their eyes. Mothers clutched their babies closer, understanding that they witnessed something beyond human comprehension. The elderly remembered Moses and the Red Sea, their hearts swelling with familiar awe. Joshua lifted his voice above the murmur of amazement that rippled through the crowd. His words carried the weight of divine authority, yet they flowed with the gentleness of a shepherd guiding his flock. He reminded them that this moment fulfilled promises made to their ancestors generations ago. The land, flowing with milk and honey, lay just beyond these waters. The crossing began in reverent silence. Family by family, tribe by tribe, the people of Israel walked across the exposed riverbed. Their sandals found purchase on ground that should have been submerged beneath rushing waters. Some paused to touch the riverbank as if to confirm the reality of what they experienced. As they walked, many gazed toward the distant walls of Jericho. The city perched on its hill like a defiant fortress, its massive stones gleaming in the afternoon sun. From this distance, it appeared impregnable, its walls stretching toward heaven with intimidating strength. Yet after witnessing the river's obedience to their God, those walls seemed less formidable than before. The Ark of the Covenant remained stationary in the middle of the riverbed until every last person had crossed safely. The priests who carried it stood like sentinels, their presence maintaining the miraculous division of waters. Only when Joshua gave the signal did they lift their burden and complete their own crossing. Behind them, the Jordan resumed its natural course with a thunderous roar. The waters that had stood at attention now rushed forward with renewed vigor, as if eager to reclaim their ancient path. The crossing was complete, but its memory would echo through generations. Joshua commanded 12 men to gather stones from the riverbed, one for each tribe of Israel. These stones would stand as a memorial, a permanent reminder of the day when heaven touched earth and made the impossible possible. When their children asked about these stones in years to come, the story would be told again and again. The first night in the Promised Land carried a different quality than all the nights before. The air itself seemed to hum with possibility. Fathers told their children stories of the patriarchs who had walked this same land centuries earlier. Mothers sang lullabies that spoke of home at last. Campfires dotted the landscape like earthbound stars. Around each flame, families shared meals that tasted sweeter than any they had known in the wilderness. The bread seemed richer, the water more refreshing. Even the simple act of gathering wood for fuel felt sacred, as if they were preparing to build their future with their own hands. Joshua walked among his people that night, his heart full of wonder at the faithfulness of God. Each face he saw reflected the same mixture of joy and anticipation. The wandering was over. The inheritance had begun. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged to celebration and rest. The walls of Jericho loomed in the darkness, their silhouette etched against the star-filled sky. Within those walls, Rahab tied her scarlet cord to the window and whispered prayers to the God of Israel. She did not know that across the river, the very people she had chosen to trust were settling into their first night in the land that would become their eternal home. Jericho in panic dawn broke over Jericho with an unusual stillness that seemed to press against the city's ancient walls. The normal sounds of morning commerce failed to emerge from the marketplace. Instead, a different energy pulsed through the narrow streets, one that made shopkeepers forget their wares and mothers gather their children close. The watchtowers that had stood guard for generations now buzzed with frantic activity. Soldiers peered across the plains toward the Jordan, their faces etched with disbelief at what they witnessed. The river that had always served as a natural barrier now revealed dry ground where rushing waters should have flowed. Beyond the empty riverbed, a sight that chilled the blood of every observer stretched across the landscape. The Israelite multitude had crossed during the night, their countless tents now dotting the plains like a field of threatening flowers. Smoke from their morning fires rose into the sky, creating a haze that seemed to blur the boundary between earth and heaven. Word spread through Jericho with the speed of wind through wheat. Merchants abandoned their stalls, farmers left their fields untended. Children were called in from their play, their games replaced by whispered conversations between worried adults. The king of Jericho summoned his council with urgency that bordered on desperation. These men, who had governed with confidence for years, now found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered. The reports from their spies painted a picture of a people guided by powers beyond human understanding. In the council chamber, voices rose and fell like waves against a crumbling shore. Some argued for immediate attack, believing that swift action might catch the Israelites before they could organize. Others counseled defensive strategies, trusting in the massive walls that had protected the city for generations. The king listened to each voice, but his mind churned with memories of recent reports. Egyptian cities reduced to ruins, mighty armies scattered like leaves before a storm. Nations that had stood for centuries now existed only in the memories of survivors. Outside the palace walls, the citizens of Jericho went about their daily routines with forced normalcy. Bakers still baked their bread, though their hands trembled as they kneaded the dough. Weavers continued their work, though they paused frequently to gaze toward the windows as if the threads themselves might reveal the future. The priests of Jericho's gods worked frantically to appease their deities. Incense burned continuously in the temples. Sacrifices were offered with renewed fervor. Yet the gods remained silent, their stone faces offering no comfort to the desperate prayers of their people. Children sensed the change in their world, though they could not name it. Their games became quieter, their laughter less frequent. Some drew pictures in the dirt of the walls that protected them, as if their childish art could somehow strengthen the massive stones. The marketplace, once alive with bargaining and laughter, now hummed with nervous energy. Conversations stopped abruptly when strangers approached. Prices fluctuated wildly as merchants struggled to make sense of an uncertain future. Some hoarded their goods, while others sold everything quickly as if preparing for a long journey. In the residential quarters, families gathered closer than usual. Evening meals stretched longer, parents reluctant to send their children to bed. Stories were told with extra care, as if the familiar tales might build walls stronger than stone around their loved ones. The prostitutes and innkeepers who worked near the city walls found themselves in an unusual position. Their establishments, typically busy with travelers and merchants, now attracted a different clientele. People came seeking information, hoping that those who dealt with strangers might have insights into the approaching threat. Rahab moved through this atmosphere of barely contained fear with careful steps. Her house, built into the wall itself, gave her a unique perspective on both the panic within the city and the growing presence beyond its borders. She watched her neighbors with new eyes, seeing them now as people who would soon face the same choice she had already made. The city's defenses were checked and rechecked. Weapons were sharpened and counted. Food supplies were inventoried with meticulous care. Yet beneath all this preparation lay a deeper understanding that traditional defenses might prove inadequate against an enemy blessed by the divine. As night fell over Jericho, the city did not sleep. Watchmen strained their eyes in the darkness, seeking signs of movement from the Israelite camp. Families huddled together, finding comfort in each other's presence. The walls that had always represented safety now felt more like the boundaries of a trap. The scarlet cord in Rahab's window fluttered gently in the evening breeze, a small banner of hope in a city consumed by fear. She alone among Jericho's residents possessed a secret that could mean the difference between life and death. Her faith in the God of Israel burned brighter as the darkness around her deepened. The siege strategy. The tent of Joshua stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its simple fabric walls containing discussions that would reshape the ancient world. Inside, the great leader knelt in prayer, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of an oil lamp. The weight of leadership pressed upon his shoulders, yet his spirit remained steady as he sought divine guidance. God spoke to Joshua in the language of the impossible, revealing a battle plan that defied every principle of warfare known to human military minds. No siege engines would be constructed, no ladders would scale the walls, no battering rams would thunder against the gates. Instead, the conquest of Jericho would unfold through obedience to instructions that seemed to mock conventional wisdom. The plan was elegantly simple, yet profoundly mysterious. For 6 days, the entire army of Israel would march around the city once each day. 7 priests would carry trumpets made from ram's horns, walking before the Ark of the Covenant. The soldiers would maintain complete silence during these marches, allowing only the sound of their footsteps and the priests' trumpets to announce their presence. On the 7th day, the pattern would change. 7 complete circuits around the city, 7 priests with 7 trumpets, and at the appointed moment, a great shout from every voice in the Israelite army. The walls of Jericho would fall, not from human strength, but from divine intervention, responding to perfect obedience. Joshua emerged from his tent as the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky. His face bore the calm confidence of a man who had heard directly from the Almighty. The impossible had become inevitable in his mind, transformed by faith into a certainty that would guide his every action. The commanders gathered around their leader, their faces showing the mixture of curiosity and trust that had characterized their relationship throughout the wilderness years. Joshua's voice carried the authority of one who spoke not his own words, but those given to him by a higher power. As the strategy unfolded, some commanders exchanged glances that spoke of their confusion. Veterans of many battles found themselves asked to participate in something that resembled a religious ceremony more than a military campaign. Yet none questioned the orders. Their faith in Joshua's leadership had been forged through years of witnessing the miraculous. The priests chosen to carry the sacred trumpets prepared for their role with reverent care. These instruments, carved from the horns of rams, would become the primary weapons in this unusual assault. The sound they produced would carry more power than any sword or spear, calling heaven to earth through their haunting melody. The Ark of the Covenant, that sacred chest containing the stone tablets of the law, would lead each day's march. Its presence transformed the entire endeavor from a military exercise into an act of worship. The same ark that had led them through the wilderness would now guide them in conquering their first city in the Promised Land. Preparations began immediately throughout the camp. Soldiers cleaned their weapons and armor, though they wondered if these tools would be needed. Mothers explained to their children that something wonderful was about to happen, something that would be remembered forever. The elderly shared stories of similar moments when God had worked through his people in ways that amazed the world. The formation for the marches was arranged with careful precision. The armed men would go first, followed by the 7 priests with their trumpets. The ark would follow, carried by the Levites, with a rear guard of soldiers bringing up the end. This procession would become a living symbol of Israel's faith, moving around Jericho like a prayer made visible. News of the strategy spread through the camp with the speed of wind through dry grass. Some received it with immediate joy, remembering the miraculous crossing of the Jordan. Others pondered the implications, wondering how such a plan could bring down walls that had withstood centuries of weather and warfare. The tribal leaders called their people together, explaining the role each would play in the coming days. Families would remain in the camp while the army marched, but their prayers would join the procession, creating a chorus of faith that would rise to heaven with each completed circuit. Craftsmen worked to ensure that the trumpets were in perfect condition. The ram's horns were polished until they gleamed in the firelight. Each priest practiced the specific sounds he would make, understanding that his music would play a crucial role in the divine symphony about to unfold. The night before the marches would begin, the camp settled into a quieter rhythm than usual. Conversations around the fires focused on the morning ahead. Parents tucked their children into bed with stories of the great things God had done for their people. The elderly remembered Moses and the plagues of Egypt, sensing that they were about to witness another chapter in the ongoing story of divine intervention. Joshua walked among his people that final evening, his presence bringing comfort and confidence to everyone he encountered. His calm demeanor spoke of absolute trust in the plan he had received. The impossible had become possible in his heart, and that certainty flowed out to touch every person in the camp. The stars above seemed to shine with unusual brightness, as if heaven itself was preparing to witness the events that would begin with the sunrise. The walls of Jericho stood in the darkness, massive and unmoved, unaware that their fate had already been sealed by a power greater than human engineering. The march begins. The morning sun climbed slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains surrounding Jericho. The city's walls, which had stood sentinel for generations, now faced their first day of divine challenge. Within the Israelite camp, the atmosphere hummed with anticipation as warriors prepared for the most unusual military campaign in human history. The trumpet call that signaled the beginning of the march carried a different quality than any that had sounded before. Its notes seemed to pierce the air with supernatural clarity, reaching every corner of the camp and echoing off the distant walls of Jericho. Soldiers who had heard countless battle calls recognized something sacred in this sound. The armed men formed their ranks with practiced precision, their weapons gleaming in the morning light. These were veterans of wilderness battles, men who had learned to trust in divine guidance over human strategy. Their faces reflected the calm confidence that comes from following orders that originate beyond human understanding. Behind them, the 7 priests lifted their ram's horn trumpets to their lips. The sound that emerged was unlike any music heard in ordinary warfare. These trumpets sang with the voice of heaven itself, their haunting melody carrying prayers and promises across the landscape. Each note seemed to vibrate with the power of ancient covenants. The Ark of the Covenant appeared next in the procession, carried by the Levites with reverent care. This sacred chest, containing the stone tablets of divine law, transformed the entire march into an act of worship. Its presence declared that this was not merely a human army on the move, but the people of God claiming their inheritance. As the procession began to move, an extraordinary silence fell over the ranks. The order for complete quiet had been given, and 30,000 voices obeyed without question. Only the sound of marching feet and the sacred trumpets broke the morning stillness, creating a rhythm that seemed to match the heartbeat of the earth itself. The path around Jericho's walls took the army close enough to see the faces of the defenders who lined the battlements. Soldiers and citizens alike stared down at the strange parade passing beneath their walls. What they witnessed defied every expectation of how wars were fought and cities were taken. The Israelite warriors marched with their heads held high, their eyes fixed forward rather than upward at the walls. Their silence was not the quiet of fear, but the stillness of faith. Each step carried them closer to a victory that would come not through their own strength, but through obedience to divine instruction. The priests with their trumpets maintained their haunting melody throughout the circuit. The sound rose and fell like waves against a shore, creating a musical backdrop that turned the entire march into a ceremony of worship. Their breath control and endurance spoke of preparation that went beyond mere physical training. From the walls above, the people of Jericho watched with growing confusion. This was not the fierce assault they had expected. No ladders were raised, no siege engines constructed, no battle cries shouted. Instead, they witnessed what appeared to be a religious procession, moving around their city with quiet determination. The Ark of the Covenant drew particular attention from the watchers on the walls. Stories of its power had reached Jericho through traders and travelers. The sight of this legendary object, carried with such reverence, added weight to the already mysterious proceedings unfolding below. As the procession rounded the northern wall, the morning light revealed the full extent of the Israelite army. The organized ranks stretched far beyond what Jericho's defenders had estimated. The sight of such numbers, moving with perfect discipline and unity, sent waves of unease through the watching crowd. The circuit took most of the morning to complete. The pace was deliberate, neither rushed nor slow, creating a rhythm that seemed to match the breathing of the earth itself. Each footstep was placed with intention, as if the very ground was being consecrated by the passing of God's people. When the procession reached its starting point, the march was complete for the day. The army turned and moved back toward their camp without ceremony or fanfare. The silence that had marked their march continued as they withdrew, leaving behind only the memory of their presence and the lingering echo of the sacred trumpets. The people of Jericho remained on their walls long after the Israelites had departed. Conversations buzzed with speculation about what they had witnessed. Some dismissed it as psychological warfare, an attempt to confuse and intimidate. Others sensed something deeper, something that touched the realm of the divine. The king of Jericho called another council meeting, his advisors even more perplexed than before. The expected assault had not come. Instead, they had witnessed something that defied military logic. The discussions that followed revealed the growing uncertainty that was beginning to crack the city's confident facade. In the Israelite camp, the army returned to their normal activities with quiet satisfaction. The first day of the divine strategy had been completed exactly as commanded. There was no celebration, no discussion of tactics, only the peaceful confidence that comes from perfect obedience. The evening meal was shared with the same quiet satisfaction. Families gathered around their fires, parents explaining to their children that what they were witnessing was unlike anything that had ever happened before. The elderly shared stories of other times when God had worked through his people in ways that amazed the world. As night fell over both camps, the contrast between them could not have been greater. Jericho buzzed with nervous energy and fearful speculation. The Israelite camp settled into peaceful rest, their trust in divine guidance providing a foundation for sleep that no earthly security could match. The scarlet cord in Rahab's window fluttered gently in the evening breeze, a small reminder that even in the midst of this supernatural siege, individual faith still mattered. Her window faced the direction from which the morning would bring another day of the mysterious march that was reshaping the destiny of nations. 6 days of waiting. The second morning dawned with the same ethereal quality as the first, as if the very air around Jericho had been transformed by the presence of the divine. Within the city walls, Rahab rose before the sun, her sleep having been fitful and filled with dreams of falling walls and rising hopes. The scarlet cord at her window caught the first light of day, a crimson beacon in the growing brightness. The sound of the Israelite trumpets drifted across the plains, their haunting melody now familiar, yet still filled with mystery. Rahab's heart quickened at the sound, knowing that each note brought her closer to the fulfillment of the promise made by the two spies. She gathered her family around her, their faces reflecting the mixture of fear and hope that had become their constant companions. Her father, weathered by years of worry and labor, struggled to understand the faith that had taken hold of his daughter's heart. His eyes held the confusion of a man whose world was shifting beneath his feet. The gods he had served all his life seemed distant and silent, while the God of Israel demonstrated his power with each passing day. Rahab's mother clung to her younger children, their innocent faces turned toward their older sister for reassurance. The little ones sensed the tension in the air, but trusted in Rahab's calm presence. She had become their anchor in a storm they could not fully comprehend, her faith providing stability in an increasingly uncertain world. The brothers who had initially mocked Rahab's decision now watched the daily procession with growing unease. Each day brought fresh evidence that the God of Israel was unlike any deity they had known. The silence of the marching army spoke louder than any war cry, its discipline and unity revealing a power that transcended human organization. From her window, Rahab observed the life of the city changing day by day. The market stalls opened later each morning, their owners reluctant to begin normal activities while the mysterious march continued. Conversations in the streets grew more hushed, more urgent. The weight of waiting pressed down on everyone like a physical burden. The third day brought new patterns of behavior among Jericho's residents. Some families began to hoard food and water, preparing for a siege that might last for months. Others seemed to abandon all pretense of normalcy, spending their days in the temples, seeking answers from gods who remained stubbornly silent. The priests of Jericho worked frantically to maintain their relevance in a crisis that seemed beyond their understanding. Their rituals and sacrifices continued, but with an increasingly desperate quality. The people who came to them for guidance left with the same questions they had brought, finding no comfort in the familiar ceremonies. On the fourth day, the city's children began to incorporate the strange procession into their play. They marched around their homes in imitation of the Israelites, though their games were quickly stopped by worried parents. The sight of their children mimicking the enemy's behavior struck too close to fears that no one wanted to name. The king of Jericho called daily council meetings, but the discussions grew more circular and less productive with each passing day. Military strategies were proposed and discarded. Diplomatic solutions were considered and rejected. The unusual nature of the siege left the leaders grasping for responses to a situation that had no precedent. By the fifth day, the psychological pressure had begun to fracture the city's unity. Neighbors who had lived in harmony for years now eyed each other with suspicion. Rumors spread like wildfire, each more fantastic than the last. Some spoke of seeing angels walking among the Israelite soldiers. Others claimed to hear voices calling from the walls themselves. The merchants who had always formed the backbone of Jericho's economy found their world collapsing around them. Trade routes that had flowed through the city for generations now seemed irrelevant in the face of divine intervention. The wealth that had defined their status meant nothing when faced with powers that transcended human understanding. Rahab watched these changes with a mixture of sadness and anticipation. The people she had lived among all her life were experiencing the same terror that had gripped the nations throughout the region. Yet she alone among them possessed the key to safety, the promise given by the spies who had eaten at her table and slept under her roof. The sixth day brought an almost unbearable tension to the city. The pattern of the march had become predictable, yet each day seemed to carry more weight than the last. The sound of the trumpets seemed to penetrate deeper into the hearts of the listeners, awakening fears that had no name and hopes that dared not speak. The families within the city walls gathered closer together as the days passed. Parents found themselves unable to explain to their children what was happening. The questions of the young ones cut through the adults' attempts at rationalization, exposing the fear that lay beneath their forced calm. In the temples, the priests offered increasingly elaborate sacrifices, as if the quantity of offerings might somehow move their gods to action. The silence of the deities became more oppressive with each passing day, their stone faces offering no comfort to their desperate worshippers. The soldiers who manned the walls grew more agitated as the week progressed. Their training had prepared them for direct assault, for enemies who fought with sword and spear. The quiet discipline of the marching army below them created a psychological pressure that traditional warfare had never imposed. As the sixth day drew to a close, even the most optimistic residents of Jericho could feel the weight of impending change. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was preparing for something unprecedented. The walls that had protected them for generations now felt less like shields and more like barriers, trapping them in a doomed city. Rahab spent the evening of the sixth day checking and rechecking the scarlet cord at her window. Her family gathered around her, their faces reflecting the mixture of terror and hope that had become their constant expression. Tomorrow would bring the seventh day, and with it, the fulfillment of promises that would reshape their world forever. The night settled over Jericho like a shroud, heavy with the weight of approaching destiny. Within the city walls, few slept peacefully. The morning would bring either deliverance or destruction, and the choice between them rested in the hands of a God whose ways transcended human understanding. The seventh day. The dawn of the seventh day arrived with a quality of light that seemed different from all the days before. The sky blazed with colors that painted the walls of Jericho in shades of gold and crimson, as if nature itself was preparing for the climactic moment that would reshape the ancient world. Within the city walls, the residents stirred with the restless energy of people who sensed that their fate hung in the balance. Rahab stood at her window before the sun had fully risen, her hands gripping the scarlet cord that had become her lifeline to hope. The fabric felt warm beneath her fingers, as if it pulsed with the same life that flowed through her veins. Around her, the members of her family gathered in the small room that had become their sanctuary, their faces reflecting the mixture of fear and anticipation that had grown stronger with each passing day. The sounds from the Israelite camp carried across the plains with unusual clarity, as if the very air had been purified to conduct the sacred music about to unfold. The preparation for this day had been different from all the others, marked by an intensity that spoke of approaching culmination. The rams' horns that would sound the final call were being prepared with special care, their voices soon to join in a chorus that would echo through eternity. The first circuit began with the same solemn dignity that had marked the previous 6 days. The armed men stepped forward in perfect formation, their weapons catching the morning light like mirrors reflecting divine fire. Behind them, the 7 priests lifted their trumpets, and the haunting melody that had become the soundtrack of Jericho's final week began to weave its spell once more. The Ark of the Covenant moved in the midst of the procession like the heart of a living organism, its presence transforming the entire march into an act of worship. The Levites who carried it walked with the careful steps of men who bore the weight of heaven itself, their reverence evident in every movement. The rear guard followed, completing the circle of divine authority that surrounded the sacred chest. As the procession completed its first circuit, the watchers on Jericho's walls began to understand that this day would be different. The army did not return to camp as it had on the previous days. Instead, it continued around the city, beginning a second circuit that sent ripples of unease through the assembled defenders. The pattern that had become familiar was breaking, and with it, the last illusions of safety that the city's residents had maintained. The second circuit passed with the same measured pace as the first, but the tension in the air seemed to thicken with each step. The third circuit brought whispers from the walls, nervous conversations that died away as the sound of the trumpets grew more insistent. The fourth circuit found the city's residents gathering in the streets, drawn by an instinct they could not name to witness whatever was about to unfold. Rahab's family pressed closer together as the fifth circuit began, their eyes fixed on the scarlet cord that marked their window. The youngest children sensed the importance of the moment without understanding its implications, their small hands reaching out to touch the fabric that had become their symbol of hope. The adults spoke in hushed voices, their words carrying the weight of prayers offered to a God they were only beginning to know. The Sixth Circuit brought a silence to the city that was deeper than any that had come before. Even the dogs seemed to sense the approaching climax, their usual barking replaced by an expectant quiet. The merchants abandoned their stalls, the soldiers left their posts, and the priests emerged from their temples, all drawn by the same irresistible pull toward the walls where destiny was about to unfold. The Seventh Circuit began with the sun high overhead, its light streaming down on the ancient walls that had weathered countless storms but had never faced a challenge like this. The Israelite army moved with the same quiet discipline that had marked their previous marches, but there was something different in the air, a sense of gathering power that made the very stones seem to tremble in anticipation. As the Seventh Circuit neared completion, Joshua raised his hand and the marching army came to a halt. The sound of their footsteps died away, leaving only the haunting melody of the 7 trumpets to fill the silence. The moment stretched like a held breath, as if all of creation was waiting for the word that would release the forces that had been building throughout the week. The command came with a voice that seemed to echo from the very throne of heaven. Joshua's call to shout rang out across the plains, and 30,000 voices responded as one. The sound that arose from the Israelite army was unlike anything heard since the world began. A chorus of human voices joined in perfect unity, powered by faith that could move mountains and bring down walls. The earth itself seemed to shudder under the weight of that tremendous shout. The walls of Jericho, which had stood for generations as symbols of human strength and engineering, began to tremble as if they were made of sand rather than stone. The massive blocks that had been fitted together with such precision started to separate, their joints widening as the very foundations of the city began to give way. The collapse came with a sound like thunder, but deeper and more resonant than any storm. The walls that had defined Jericho for centuries crumbled as if they were made of clay, their destruction so complete that it seemed to erase the very memory of their existence. Dust rose in great clouds, obscuring the sun and transforming the clear morning into a twilight of divine judgment. Through the chaos and destruction, one small section of wall remained standing. Rahab's house, marked by the scarlet cord that fluttered like a banner of hope, stood intact amidst the ruins. The protection promised by the spies had been fulfilled in the most dramatic way possible, her faith rewarded with preservation, while the city around her crumbled into dust. The silence that followed the collapse was profound, broken only by the settling of stones and the whisper of dust drifting on the wind. The impossible had become reality, the divine promise had been fulfilled, and the city that had seemed impregnable now lay in ruins at the feet of the God of Israel. The age of wandering was over, and the age of possession had begun. Rahab is spared. The dust settled slowly over the ruins of Jericho, revealing a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Where mighty walls had stood moments before, only scattered stones and rubble remained, their ancient strength reduced to debris by the power of divine intervention. Through this scene of complete destruction, two figures moved with careful purpose, their eyes scanning the devastation for one specific site that would fulfill a sacred promise. The Israelite soldiers who had been chosen for this special mission carried the weight of their oath in their hearts. These were the same men who had eaten at Rahab's table, who had slept under her roof, and who had given their word that she and her family would be spared when judgment came to the city. The scarlet cord that had served as their sign now stood as a beacon of hope amidst the ruins. The section of wall that housed Rahab's dwelling stood like a monument to divine protection, its stones intact while everything around it had crumbled to dust. The scarlet cord fluttered gently in the breeze, its crimson fabric catching the light like a banner of mercy in a field of judgment. The sight of it brought relief to the hearts of the men who had promised to honor its meaning. Rahab's voice called out from within the house, her words carrying the mixture of joy and terror that comes from witnessing the impossible. The sound of approaching footsteps had reached her ears, and she knew that the moment of deliverance had arrived. Her family gathered around her, their faces reflecting the awe of people who had watched their world collapse while they remained safe within their small sanctuary. The soldiers climbed carefully over the rubble that had once been Jericho's main street, their movements respectful as they approached the house that had been marked for salvation. The contrast between the destruction around them and the intact dwelling ahead of them served as a powerful reminder of the precision with which divine judgment had been carried out. When the door opened, Rahab's face appeared, her eyes bright with tears of gratitude and relief. The promise that had sustained her through the long days of waiting had been fulfilled in the most dramatic way possible. The God of Israel had proven faithful to his word, and the oath sworn by his servants had been honored down to the smallest detail. The family that emerged from the house represented a cross-section of Jericho's population, transformed by faith from citizens of a condemned city into recipients of divine mercy. Rahab's parents, her brothers, and the extended family who had chosen to trust in her decision now found themselves among the living while their neighbors had perished in the collapse. The soldiers spoke gently to the frightened family, their voices carrying the authority of men who served the God of Israel. They explained that safe passage had been arranged, that their lives would be preserved, and that they would be given a place among the people of God. The covenant made in secret was now being fulfilled in the full light of day. The journey from the ruins of Rahab's house to the Israelite camp was conducted with careful attention to the family's emotional state. The soldiers understood that these people had just witnessed the complete destruction of everything they had known, even as they celebrated their own deliverance. The mixture of joy and grief that marked their faces reflected the complex nature of divine judgment. As they walked through the debris-filled streets, Rahab's family saw the complete extent of the destruction that had befallen their city. Buildings that had stood for generations were reduced to rubble. The marketplace where they had conducted their daily business was buried under tons of stone. The temples where they had once worshipped were nothing more than scattered blocks. The Israelite camp received the rescued family with the courtesy due to people who had chosen to align themselves with the God of Israel. Joshua himself met with Rahab, his weathered face showing both the satisfaction of a promise kept and the compassion of a leader who understood the magnitude of what she had witnessed. The great commander's words to Rahab carried the weight of official recognition. Her decision to protect the spies had not gone unnoticed by the leadership of Israel. The faith she had shown in the God of Israel, demonstrated through actions that put her own life at risk, had earned her a place of honor among the people she had chosen to join. Tents were provided for Rahab's family, situated in a section of the camp where they could begin their new lives without feeling isolated from their adopted people. The location was chosen with care, close enough to the main community to foster integration, yet positioned to allow them the space they needed to process the dramatic changes in their circumstances. The other Israelite families welcomed the newcomers with the kindness that comes from understanding what it means to be strangers in a strange land. Many of the older generation remembered their own days as foreigners in Egypt, and they recognized in Rahab's family the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that had marked their own journey to freedom. Food was shared generously, the simple meal taking on the significance of a covenant feast. Bread broken together sealed relationships that would endure for generations. Water drawn from the same wells symbolized the merging of destinies that had begun when Rahab first chose to trust in the God of Israel. The children of both families began the tentative process of forming friendships that would bridge the gap between their different backgrounds. Language barriers were overcome through the universal communication of play, while the adults worked to establish the deeper connections that would transform strangers into family. As evening approached, the reality of their situation began to settle more fully into the consciousness of Rahab's family. The old life was gone forever, buried beneath the rubble of Jericho's walls. The new life stretched ahead of them, filled with possibilities they could barely imagine and challenges they had yet to comprehend. The scarlet cord that had marked their window for salvation was carefully preserved, its significance too great to be discarded with the other remnants of their former life. This simple piece of fabric had become a tangible reminder of divine faithfulness, a symbol that would be treasured by their descendants for generations to come. Rahab's testimony of faith spread quickly through the camp, her story becoming an inspiration to those who heard it. Here was a woman who had risked everything based on reports of God's mighty works, who had chosen faith over familiarity, and who had been rewarded with deliverance beyond her wildest dreams. The spies who had benefited from her protection visited the family that evening, their faces reflecting the deep satisfaction that comes from seeing promises fulfilled. The relationship that had begun in secrecy and danger had blossomed into something that would endure long after the immediate crisis had passed. The night sounds of the Israelite camp provided a new soundtrack for Rahab's family as they settled into their temporary shelters. The prayers and songs that rose from countless fires spoke of a faith that was both ancient and immediate, both communal and deeply personal. These were the sounds of a people who knew their God and trusted in his guidance. Sleep came slowly to the rescued family, their minds processing the incredible events of the day. The transition from condemned citizens of a doomed city to protected members of God's chosen people was almost too great to comprehend in a single day. Yet the evidence was undeniable. They were alive, they were safe, and they were home. The aftermath of Jericho. The morning sun rose over a landscape forever changed, its light revealing the complete transformation that divine judgment had wrought upon the ancient city of Jericho. Where massive walls had once stood as symbols of human achievement and security, only scattered stones remained to mark the boundaries of what had been one of the most fortified cities in the known world. The Israelite army moved through the ruins with the methodical care of men who understood they were executing divine justice. The destruction was so complete that it seemed as if the city had been erased from the earth by an invisible hand. Streets that had bustled with commerce for generations were buried beneath tons of rubble, their very existence now only a memory. Joshua walked among the ruins with his commanders, their voices hushed as they witnessed the thoroughness of God's judgment. The leader who had received the divine battle plan now saw its results in devastating detail. Every stone that had been carefully placed by human hands had been displaced by divine power, creating a scene that would be remembered for generations. The soldiers tasked with searching the ruins worked carefully through the debris, following specific instructions about what could be taken and what must be avoided. The silver and gold, the bronze and iron, these were to be set apart for the treasury of the Lord. The city had been devoted to destruction, but its precious metals would serve the purposes of the people who now claimed this land as their inheritance. From her position in the Israelite camp, Rahab watched the systematic dismantling of everything she had once known. The marketplace where she had purchased her daily needs was buried beneath collapsed buildings. The streets where she had walked as a child were indistinguishable from the surrounding rubble. The temples where the people of Jericho had sought their gods were reduced to scattered stones. Her family stood beside her, their faces reflecting the complex emotions that come from witnessing the complete destruction of one's former life. Relief at their salvation mingled with grief for their neighbors who had not shared their fate. Joy at their deliverance was tempered by sorrow for the familiar places that would never be seen again. The younger members of her family struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what they witnessed. Children who had played in Jericho's streets now saw those same streets buried under tons of stone. The familiar landmarks of their childhood had been erased as completely as if they had never existed at all. The sight of the destruction served as a powerful reminder of the choice Rahab had made when the spies first entered her house. The God of Israel had proven himself to be exactly what the reports had claimed, a deity whose power transcended human understanding, whose judgments were as thorough as his mercies were complete. The other residents of the Israelite camp watched the proceedings with their own mixture of emotions. Veterans of the wilderness wanderings had seen the power of God demonstrated many times, but the complete destruction of a fortified city was unprecedented in their experience. The younger generation, born during the 40 years of wandering, witnessed their first major conquest with wide-eyed amazement. The priests who had carried the ark around the city now supervised the collection of the precious metals that would be added to the sacred treasury. Their reverent handling of these materials reflected their understanding that even the spoils of war belonged first to God and only secondarily to the people who had been his instruments of judgment. The work of searching the ruins continued throughout the day, but it was work conducted in an atmosphere of reverent awe rather than triumphant celebration. The completeness of the destruction sobered even the most battle-hardened soldiers, reminding them that they served a God whose power could not be contained within human categories of understanding. As the sun reached its highest point, the heat began to reveal another aspect of the destruction. Thus, the dust that rose carried with it the scent of a city that had existed for centuries and had been reduced to rubble in moments. The very air seemed heavy with the weight of ended lives and finished stories. The archaeological layers that represented generations of human habitation had been compressed into a uniform field of debris. Pottery that had been crafted by skilled hands lay broken among the stones. Tools that had served families for years were buried beneath the remnants of the walls that had once protected their owners. Joshua called his commanders together as the afternoon wore on, his instructions focusing on the future rather than dwelling on the destruction they had witnessed. The conquest of Jericho was only the beginning of a larger campaign that would require the same faith and obedience that had brought down these seemingly impregnable walls. The message sent to the surrounding cities by Jericho's destruction would be unmistakable. The God of Israel was not like the gods of other nations, limited by human understanding or constrained by natural law. His power could level mountains and dry up seas, and no wall built by human hands could stand against his determined purpose. As evening approached, the work in the ruins was suspended, but the impact of what had been accomplished continued to reverberate through both the Israelite camp and the surrounding region. Messengers had already carried news of the miraculous conquest to distant cities, spreading fear among Israel's enemies and hope among any who might choose to align themselves with the God who had demonstrated such awesome power. The fires that burned in the Israelite camp that night cast dancing shadows that seemed to celebrate the victory that had been won through faith rather than force. The songs that rose from around those fires spoke of a God who kept his promises, who rewarded obedience, and who could accomplish the impossible through people willing to trust in his guidance. Rahab and her family gathered around their own fire, their hearts full of gratitude for the deliverance they had experienced. The scarlet cord that had marked their window now rested safely among their few possessions, a tangible reminder of the day when faith had been rewarded with life itself. The old world was gone, but the new world stretched before them, filled with possibilities they were only beginning to imagine. Rahab among strangers. The days following the conquest of Jericho brought a new kind of challenge for Rahab and her family, and one that required different forms of courage than they had needed during the siege. The physical safety they had gained through divine protection now gave way to the more subtle difficulties of finding their place among a people whose customs, language, and way of life differed dramatically from everything they had known. The Israelite camp buzzed with the activities of a nomadic people preparing to settle in their promised land. Families who had wandered for the wilderness now faced the prospect of permanent homes, established communities, and the transformation from a traveling nation into a settled society. For Rahab's family, this transition carried the additional complexity of learning to belong to a people they had only recently joined. Language barriers created the first and most immediate challenges. While Rahab had picked up some Hebrew during her interactions with travelers and merchants, her family members struggled with even basic communication. Simple requests for food or directions required gestures and patience from both sides, creating moments of awkwardness that reminded everyone of the cultural divide that needed to be bridged. The religious practices of Israel presented another area where careful navigation was required. The daily rhythms of worship, the observance of Sabbaths, and the dietary laws that governed what could and could not be eaten were all foreign concepts to people who had grown up in the polytheistic culture of Jericho. Learning these new ways required both dedication from the newcomers and patience from their teachers. Some members of the Israelite community welcomed the refugees with open arms, seeing their presence as evidence of God's power to transform hearts and draw people from every nation to himself. These families invited Rahab's relatives to share meals, taught them Hebrew phrases, and included them in daily activities that helped bridge the gap between stranger and neighbor. Others viewed the newcomers with suspicion that was difficult to disguise. The fact that these people came from Jericho, a city that had been devoted to destruction, raised questions in some minds about whether their conversion was genuine or merely expedient. Whispered conversations and sidelong glances reminded Rahab that acceptance would need to be earned rather than assumed. The children adapted most quickly to their new circumstances, their natural flexibility allowing them to pick up the language and customs with remarkable speed. Rahab watched with wonder as her youngest relatives began to play with Israelite children, their games serving as a bridge between cultures that adult conversations sometimes struggled to span. The women of the camp proved especially helpful in teaching Rahab's female relatives the practical skills they would need in their new life. Cooking methods, weaving techniques, and child-rearing practices all differed from what they had known in Jericho. Patient instruction and gentle correction gradually helped them master these new ways of living. Rahab herself found her position particularly complex, as her role in saving the spies had given her a certain status within the community, yet her past profession created barriers that were difficult to overcome. Some viewed her with the respect due to someone who had risked everything for faith, while others struggled to separate her present identity from her former life. The process of learning to worship the God of Israel required perhaps the greatest adjustment of all. The concept of a single, invisible deity who could not be represented by any image challenged everything they had been taught about the nature of the divine. Yet the evidence of his power in the conquest of Jericho provided a foundation for faith that grew stronger with each passing day. The leadership of the tribe worked carefully to ensure that the integration process proceeded smoothly. Joshua himself took a personal interest in Rahab's family, understanding that their successful adaptation would serve as an example to other foreigners who might choose to join Israel in the future. His guidance and protection helped establish their legitimacy within the community. Economic integration posed its own challenges, as the skills and knowledge that had served them well in Jericho needed to be adapted to their new circumstances. The trade networks they had known were gone. The currency they had used was worthless, and the social connections that had facilitated business were severed forever. The tent that served as their temporary home became a gathering place where old and new ways of life intersected. Hebrew lessons were conducted around the evening fire, while stories of Jericho's history were shared with Israelite neighbors who had never seen a walled city. These exchanges enriched both communities, creating bonds that transcended cultural differences. Rahab's testimony became a powerful tool for encouraging faith within the broader Israelite community. Her willingness to risk everything based on reports of God's mighty works served as an example to those who sometimes struggled with doubt. The physical evidence of her salvation provided tangible proof of divine faithfulness that strengthened the faith of many. The seasonal festivals and celebrations of Israel provided opportunities for deeper integration as Rahab's family learned to participate in communal worship and celebration. The Passover, with its emphasis on deliverance from bondage, held special meaning for people who had experienced their own miraculous rescue from destruction. As weeks turned into months, the barriers between stranger and neighbor began to dissolve. Shared experiences, mutual assistance during times of need, and then the common challenges of establishing life in a new land created bonds that transcended the differences in background and history that had initially separated them. The transformation was not without its difficult moments. Cultural misunderstandings, religious adjustments, and the simple homesickness that comes from leaving everything familiar behind all took their toll. Yet the underlying foundation of faith that had brought them to this point provided strength for each new challenge they faced. The scarlet cord that had once marked their window for salvation now served as a reminder of the journey they had undertaken. From outsiders seeking mercy to insiders learning to belong, their story was becoming woven into the larger narrative of God's people. The thread that had once marked them for deliverance was now part of the fabric of their new community, binding them to their adopted family with ties that would endure for generations. The new beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Israelite camp as Rahab stepped into her new world. Around her, the rhythms of a different life unfolded. Women drew water from wells she had never seen. Children played games with rules she didn't know. The language of her new people flowed like a river she was learning to swim in. Her family huddled close in those first days. Her mother's eyes held worry lines deeper than before. Her father spoke little, his weathered hands clasping and unclasping as he watched the strange customs around them. The siblings who had once filled their home with laughter now whispered among themselves, uncertain of their place in this new order. The Israelites had given them a portion of land near the camp's edge, a practical choice, perhaps. Close enough to be protected, distant enough to maintain boundaries. Rahab understood the unspoken message. They were welcome, but they were also watched. Each day brought small challenges that revealed the vast distance between her old life and this new one. The way bread was prepared differed from her mother's ancient methods. The prayers that rose at dawn and dusk followed patterns her ears had never heard. Even the stars seemed arranged differently in this place where the God of Israel was praised. Yet something deeper stirred within Rahab's heart. Beyond the practical struggles of learning new ways, she felt a pull toward something greater. The faith that had moved her to save the spies now grew stronger in the soil of daily life. She began to understand that her rescue from Jericho was only the beginning of a longer journey. The God who had brought down mighty walls seemed to be building something new in her life. Each morning brought opportunities to choose trust over fear, hope over despair. The scarlet cord that had marked her window now seemed to mark her very soul with the promise of belonging to something eternal. Her children adapted more quickly than the adults. They picked up the Hebrew language with ease, their young voices soon joining the songs that echoed through the camp. For us, their laughter began to return, tentative at first, then growing bolder as they found their place among the Israelite children. Rahab watched them with a mixture of joy and sadness. Joy because they were safe, because they had a future. Sadness because she saw how quickly they were becoming part of a world that still felt foreign to her. The gap between generations seemed to widen with each passing day. The work of building a new life consumed her days. There were skills to learn, relationships to forge, and trust to earn. The Israelite women approached her with caution, their eyes holding questions they didn't voice. She understood their hesitation. After all, she had been part of the enemy not so long ago. But gradually, Small acts of kindness began to bridge the divide. A shared meal here, help with a difficult task there, children playing together created bonds that their parents slowly began to follow. The universal language of daily life started to weave connections where formal introductions had failed. At night, when the camp settled into quiet, Rahab would look up at the stars and remember the walls of Jericho. The life she had left behind seemed like a dream now. The familiar streets, the known faces, the routines that had shaped her days, all of it had crumbled along with the city walls. The woman who had once stood at her window, watching the Israelite army march below, was being transformed into someone new. Each day stripped away another layer of her former identity, revealing someone she was only beginning to know. The process was both frightening and wonderful, like watching herself being born again. Her faith, once a desperate gamble in a moment of crisis, now became the foundation upon which she built each new day. The God who had saved her life was reshaping her heart, her mind, her very understanding of what it meant to be alive. The scarlet cord that had once hung from her window now rested in a small wooden box among her few possessions. But its meaning had not faded. If anything, it had deepened. It reminded her that salvation was not just about escape from danger, but about transformation into something beautiful and new. As the weeks turned into months, Rahab began to feel the first stirrings of something she had never expected, a sense of home. Not the home of familiar places and faces, but the deeper home of belonging to a people and a God who had claimed her as their own. The new beginning was not just about learning to live in a different place. It was about learning to live as a different person. The woman who had once served the gods of Jericho now served the God of Israel. The woman who had once hidden behind deception now walked in the light of truth. The woman who had once feared for her life now lived with the confidence of divine protection. Her story was being rewritten, not by her own hand, but by the hand of the God who had brought her out of darkness into light. Each day was a new page in a story that was far from over. The best chapters, she sensed, were still to come. The redemption arc. The transformation of Rahab unfolded like a flower opening to the sun. Month by month, her old life seemed to fade while something entirely new took its place. The woman who had once navigated the dark corners of Jericho now walked openly in the light of her new faith. Her past had been marked by survival, by choices made in desperation and need. Every day had brought the challenge of making a living in a world that offered few options for women like her. The streets of Jericho had been harsh teachers, and she had learned their lessons well, perhaps too well. But the God of Israel seemed to specialize in taking broken things and making them whole. What had once been sources of shame began to reveal themselves as sources of strength. The courage that had led her to make difficult choices now led her to embrace a different kind of courage, the courage to trust in something greater than herself. The Israelite camp became her classroom, and life itself became her teacher. She learned to pray in ways that reached beyond desperate pleas for help. Her prayers became conversations with a God who seemed to listen, who seemed to care about the details of her daily life. The rituals and ceremonies of her new people began to make sense. The sacrifices, the festivals, the careful observance of holy days, all of it pointed toward a relationship with the divine that was both personal and communal. She was not just joining a new tribe, she was joining a new understanding of what it meant to be human. Her family watched her transformation with wonder and sometimes with concern. They saw the peace that settled over her features, the way her shoulders relaxed as the months passed. The constant tension that had marked her life in Jericho slowly melted away, replaced by something they had never seen in her before: contentment. The shame that had shadowed her steps for so long began to lift. In the eyes of her new God, she was not defined by her past mistakes, but by her present faith. The woman who had once felt worthless now began to understand her infinite worth in the eyes of the one who had called her out of darkness. This shift in self-understanding changed everything. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke to others, the way she approached each new day, all of it was touched by the growing realization that she had been chosen, not condemned. The other women in the camp began to notice the change. Where once they had approached her with suspicion, now they came with curiosity. Her story, whispered from tent to tent, became a source of hope for others who carried their own burdens of shame and regret. She found herself becoming a confidant, someone to whom others could bring their own struggles with faith and doubt. Her willingness to share her own journey created safe spaces for others to examine their own hearts. The very experiences that had once isolated her now became bridges that connected her to others. The healing was not instant or complete. Some days brought reminders of her old life that stung like reopened wounds. Memories would surface unexpectedly, carrying with them the weight of choices she wished she could unmake. But even these difficult moments became part of her larger story of redemption. She learned to offer those painful memories to her God, to let them become part of the foundation upon which her new life was built. The scars remained, but they no longer defined her. They became testimonies to the power of divine grace to transform even the most broken places. Her understanding of forgiveness deepened beyond anything she had imagined possible. She had thought forgiveness meant forgetting, but she discovered it meant something far more profound. It meant transformation. The past was not erased, it was redeemed, given new meaning and purpose. The woman who had once hidden spies in her home now hid nothing from her God. She brought her whole self, past, present, and future, into the light of divine love. And in that light, she found not judgment, but acceptance, not condemnation, but compassion. Her redemption became a living testimony to the character of the God she now served. Here was a deity who did not demand perfection, but offered transformation. Here was a love that did not depend on worthiness, but created worthiness. The scarlet cord that had once marked her window for salvation now seemed to mark her entire life. She was a woman, marked by grace, set apart not for destruction, but for restoration. Her story became a thread in the larger tapestry of divine redemption that was being woven throughout the world. As the seasons changed, so did she. The woman who had once feared the judgment of others now stood confident in the love of her God. The woman who had once hidden in shadows now walked boldly in the light. The woman who had once defined herself by her mistakes now defined herself by her faith. Her redemption was not just personal, it was prophetic. She stood as a living sign that no one was beyond the reach of divine grace, that no past was too dark to be transformed by divine light. Her very existence became a promise that redemption was possible for anyone willing to trust in the God who specializes in making all things new. The journey was far from over, but the destination was clear. She was becoming the woman God had always intended her to be, not despite her past, but because of how that past had been redeemed and transformed into something beautiful and new. Rahab and Salmon. The first time Rahab saw Salmon, he was teaching a group of young men about the laws of Moses. His voice carried across the camp with the authority of someone who had spent years studying the ways of God. She paused in her work, drawn by the gentle strength in his words and the way the younger men listened with respect and attention. Salmon was a descendant of Judah, his lineage traced back through generations of faithful servants of the God of Israel. His family name carried weight in the camp, and his reputation for wisdom and integrity had been earned through years of faithful service. He was precisely the kind of man who should have had nothing to do with a woman like Rahab. Yet something stirred in his heart when he first heard her story. The tale of the woman who had saved the spies, who had risked everything to trust in the God of Israel, captured his imagination in ways that surprised him. He found himself curious about this stranger who had shown such remarkable faith. Their first conversation happened by chance, or perhaps by divine design. Rahab was drawing water from the well when her bucket slipped from her hands, spilling precious water onto the ground. Salmon happened to be passing by and helped her retrieve the bucket, their eyes meeting for just a moment over the simple act of shared kindness. She expected him to walk away without another word. After all, she knew her reputation in the camp. But instead he lingered, asking about her family, about how they were adjusting to their new life. His questions were gentle, without judgment, and she found herself answering more freely than she had with anyone else. The conversations continued, brief encounters that gradually grew longer. He would seek her out during the evening hours when the camp settled into quiet. They would walk along the edges of the settlement, talking about faith, about the God who had brought them both to this place, about the mysteries of divine providence. Salmon was unlike any man she had ever known. Where the men of Jericho had been driven by appetite and ambition, he seemed driven by something deeper. His faith was not a burden he carried, but a joy that illuminated his entire being. He spoke of God not as a distant deity, but as a father who was intimately involved in the details of human life. She began to see herself through his eyes, not as a woman marked by shame, but as a woman marked by grace. His respect for her story, his admiration for her courage, slowly began to heal wounds she had carried for so long that she had forgotten they were there. The other women in the camp began to notice. Some whispered with disapproval. A man of Salmon's standing should not be seen with a woman of Rahab's past. Others watched with curiosity, wondering if something beautiful might emerge from this unlikely pairing. Salmon's family initially viewed the developing relationship with concern. They spoke to him privately, reminding him of his position, his responsibilities, his future. But they also knew their son, knew the depth of his faith and the wisdom of his choices. They began to watch and wait, trusting that God would guide his path. For Rahab, the growing affection was both wonderful and terrifying. She had never experienced love that was not transactional, that did not demand something in return. Salmon's love seemed to be a gift freely given, with no strings attached and no price demanded. She found herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with trying to be worthy of his love. His presence in her life created a safe space where she could continue to heal, to grow, to become the woman God was calling her to be. His faith strengthened her faith. His peace deepened her peace. Their courtship was unconventional by the standards of either of their cultures. They were both outsiders in their own ways, she by birth, he by choice. But they found in each other a kindred spirit, someone who understood the complexities of faith and the challenges of following God in a world that often seemed to reward other values. The decision to marry was not made lightly. Both understood the challenges they would face, the whispers that would follow them, the difficulties their children might encounter. But they also understood something more important. They belonged together, their union blessed by the same God who had brought them both out of darkness into light. The wedding ceremony was simple but meaningful. Representatives from both families stood witness as they pledged their lives to each other and to the God they both served. The scarlet cord that had once marked Rahab's window for salvation now seemed to mark their union as something sacred and divinely ordained. Their marriage became a symbol of the radical nature of divine grace. Here was a union that transcended social boundaries, that ignored conventional expectations, that declared loudly that God's love was available to all who would receive it. Their love story became part of the larger love story between God and humanity. The life they built together was marked by simple joys and deep contentment. Salmon's love provided the security that had been missing from Rahab's life, while her faith brought a fresh perspective to his understanding of God's grace. Together, they became more than either could have been alone. Their home became a place of welcome for others who felt like outsiders, a sanctuary for those who needed to experience the kind of love that looks beyond the surface to the heart beneath. Their marriage itself became a ministry, a living demonstration of the power of redemption to transform lives and create new possibilities. In the quiet moments of their life together, Rahab would sometimes marvel at the journey that had brought her to this place. From the walls of Jericho to the arms of a man who loved her completely, it was a transformation that could only be explained by the grace of a God who specialized in writing beautiful endings to broken stories. The lineage of kings. The child that grew in Rahab's womb carried within him the weight of two worlds. Part Canaanite, part Israelite, he would bridge the gap between his mother's past and his father's heritage. As Rahab felt the first stirrings of life within her, she understood that this child was more than the fruit of her love with Salmon. He was part of a divine plan that stretched far beyond her understanding. When Boaz was born, the midwives marveled at his strength and the peace that seemed to surround him. Rahab held her son close, remembering the scarlet cord that had once marked her window for salvation. Now she held in her arms another kind of cord, a living link in the chain of divine promise that would connect her story to the greatest story ever told. The name Boaz meant, "In him is strength," and from his earliest days, the child seemed to embody that meaning. He grew strong in body and spirit, absorbing the faith of his parents like a tree absorbing sunlight. His mother's stories of redemption and his father's teachings about the law of Moses shaped his understanding of the world and his place in it. As Boaz grew, so did Rahab's understanding of her own role in the divine plan. She began to see that her rescue from Jericho had been about more than saving her own life. It had been about preserving a lineage, about ensuring that her son would be born to carry forward something precious and eternal. The boy learned early about his mother's past, not as a source of shame, but as a source of wonder. Rahab told him the story of the spies, of the falling walls, of the God who had saved their family from destruction. She wanted him to understand that his very existence was a testament to divine grace and mercy. Salmon taught his son about the promises God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He explained how their family was now part of that great promise, how their lineage would play a role in the redemption of the world. The boy listened with wide eyes, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he was being told. Years passed, and Boaz became a man of reputation in Israel. His character reflected the best of both his parents, his mother's courage and his father's integrity. He became a leader in Bethlehem, known for his fairness in business and his kindness to the poor and vulnerable. When Boaz met Ruth, the Moabite widow who had come to Israel with her mother-in-law Naomi, he saw in her something that reminded him of his own mother's story. Here was another foreign woman who had chosen to trust in the God of Israel, another outsider who had found her place among the chosen people. Their love story echoed the love story of his parents. Once again, boundaries were crossed, conventions were challenged, and grace triumphed over prejudice. When Boaz and Ruth married, they continued the pattern of redemption that had begun with Rahab and Salmon. The son born to Boaz and Ruth was named Obed, meaning servant. He would grow to become the father of Jesse, who would become the father of David, the shepherd boy, who would become the greatest king in Israel's history. The line that began with Rahab's faith would culminate in the throne of David. Rahab lived to see her grandson born, and in his tiny face, she glimpsed the future that God had planned. She understood now that it was not just about her own redemption, but about the redemption of the world. Her faith had become a cornerstone in the foundation of the kingdom of God. The woman who had once stood at her window in Jericho, watching the army of Israel march below, could never have imagined that her great-great-grandson would one day rule over that same army. The scarlet cord that had marked her for salvation had become a royal lineage that would mark the world for blessing. David, the king who would unite Israel and establish Jerusalem as the city of God, carried within his veins the blood of Rahab, the psalms he would write, the victories he would win, the kingdom he would establish. All of it was connected to the faith of a woman who had chosen to trust in the God of Israel. But the lineage would not end with David. Through his descendants, the promise would continue, stretching forward through the centuries toward an even greater fulfillment. The family tree that began with Rahab's faith would eventually produce the one who would be called the Son of David, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. The genealogy that Matthew would one day record would include 4 women, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba, each with their own story of redemption and grace. But Rahab's name would stand out as the first, the pioneer who proved that no background, no past, no circumstance could disqualify someone from being part of God's eternal plan. In the quiet moments of her later years, Rahab would sometimes think about the mystery of it all. She had been born in a pagan city, had lived a life that seemed to lead nowhere, had faced destruction and death. But the God who had saved her had also used her, had made her part of a story that would echo through eternity. The child of her womb had become part of the lineage of kings, but more than that, he had become part of the lineage of the King of Kings. Her faith had not just saved her life, it had helped to save the world. The scarlet cord that had once hung from her window had become a thread in the tapestry of divine redemption that would cover the earth. Looking back, she could see the hand of God in every detail of her story. From the spies who had come to her son, who now carried forward the divine promise, every piece had been part of a larger plan that was both beautiful and mysterious. Her legacy would not be measured in gold or silver, in power or position, but in the righteousness of her descendants and the faithfulness of her God. She had become a mother of kings, a grandmother of the kingdom of God, a living testament to the power of divine grace to transform lives and write beautiful endings to broken stories. Legacy of faith. The years had painted silver threads through Rahab's hair, and lines of wisdom had settled around her eyes. She had become a matriarch, a keeper of stories, a living bridge between the past and the future. In the evening hours, when the work of the day was done, children and grandchildren would gather around her, hungry for the tales that had shaped their heritage. Her voice had grown gentle with age, but her memory remained sharp. She could recall every detail of that night when the spies came to her door, every word of the bargain she had struck, every moment of fear and faith that had led to her family's salvation. But now, looking back across the years, she understood that those memories were not just hers alone. They belonged to all who would come after her. The faith that had moved her to hide the spies had grown into something far larger than she had ever imagined. It had become a family inheritance passed down from generation to generation like a precious treasure. Each child who heard her story received not just the facts of what had happened, but the deeper truth of what it meant to trust in the God of Israel. Boaz had taken that faith and made it his own, adding to it his own experiences of divine faithfulness. His kindness to Ruth, his willingness to be her kinsman redeemer, his role in preserving the lineage of David, all of it flowed from the foundation of faith that his mother had laid. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried the legacy forward in their own ways. Some became leaders in the community, using their influence to protect the vulnerable and advance the cause of justice. Others became teachers, passing on the stories and wisdom of their ancestors. Still others became simple servants, living out their faith in the quiet moments of daily life. But the legacy was not just about individual lives transformed. It was about a people changed, a nation touched by the power of divine grace. Rahab's story had become part of the larger story of Israel and is proof that the God they served was not limited by human boundaries or prejudices. Her name was whispered in prayers of mothers who struggled with shame, spoken aloud in testimonies of those who had found redemption. The woman who had once been an outsider had become a symbol of the radical inclusiveness of divine love. Her story gave hope to all who felt that their past disqualified them from a future with God. The faith that had saved her from the falling walls of Jericho had become a faith that could save anyone from any kind of destruction. The scarlet cord that had marked her window had become a symbol of the blood that would one day mark the doorposts of all who trusted in God's salvation. As she watched her descendants grow and flourish, Rahab began to understand the true magnitude of what God had done through her. Her faith had not just saved her family, it had preserved a lineage through which the salvation of the world would come. The child she had rocked in her arms, the grandson she had held on her knees, the great-grandson she had blessed with her aging hands, all of them were part of a plan that stretched from eternity to eternity. The prayers she had learned to pray in her new life had become a heritage for her children. They had learned to call upon the God of Israel not as strangers but as children, not as beggars but as beloved. The intimacy with the divine that had transformed her life had become a birthright for all who came after her. Her story had become a testament to the power of decision. In the crucial moment when the spies had come to her door, she had chosen faith over fear, hope over despair, the God of Israel over the gods of her ancestors. That single choice had rippled through the generations, affecting not just her own destiny, but the destiny of countless others. The legacy of faith she left behind was not just about belief, it was about action. She had taught her children that faith without works was empty, that trust in God must be demonstrated through faithful living. Her descendants learned not just to believe in God, but to live as if they believed, to act as if their faith made a difference in the world. The stories she told in those evening hours became more than entertainment. They became instruction, inspiration, and invitation. Each child who heard about the scarlet cord learned that they too could trust in God's protection. Each grandchild who listened to the tale of the falling walls learned that no obstacle was too great for the God they served. Her legacy was also one of inclusion. She had been a foreigner who became family, an outsider who became essential, a woman with a shameful past who became a revered ancestor. Her story proclaimed that God's love was available to all, regardless of background or circumstance. The faith that had begun with a desperate gamble had become a confident trust. The woman who had once hidden behind deception had become a beacon of truth. The life that had once seemed headed for destruction had become a source of blessing for generations. As she prepared to pass from this world to the next, Rahab could look back with satisfaction at the faith she had built and the legacy she was leaving. Her children and grandchildren would carry forward not just her DNA, but her devotion, not just her name, but her commitment to the God who had saved them all. The scarlet cord that had once marked her window for salvation had become a golden thread woven through the tapestry of divine redemption. Her faith had become part of the eternal story of God's love for humanity, a story that would continue long after her own chapter had ended. In the quiet moments before sleep, she would sometimes whisper the same prayer she had learned to pray in those early days after her rescue. Thank you, God of Israel, for choosing me, for saving me, for using me. And in the silence that followed, she could almost hear the echo of that prayer being repeated by voices not yet born, descendants not yet conceived, children of faith who would carry her legacy into the future. Rahab in the Scriptures. Centuries passed after Rahab's voice had been stilled, but her name refused to be forgotten. The woman who had once stood at her window in Jericho, watching the army of Israel march below, had become more than a historical figure. She had become a symbol, a testament, a living illustration of divine grace that would speak to generations yet unborn. When the scribes began to record the genealogy of Jesus, they faced a choice. They could have simply listed the names of the men, following the traditional pattern of Jewish genealogies, but something moved them to include the names of 5 women, and Rahab's name was among them. In the Gospel of Matthew, her story became part of the greatest story ever told. The inclusion was remarkable for many reasons. Most genealogies of the time focused exclusively on the male line, considering women as mere vessels for carrying forward the family name. But here, in the most important genealogy ever recorded, Rahab's name appeared alongside Tamar, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary, women whose stories of faith and redemption had become essential to understanding the character of God. Her name appeared not as a footnote or an afterthought, but as an integral part of the divine plan. She was listed as the mother of Boaz, the grandmother of Obed, the great-grandmother of Jesse, the great-great-grandmother of David. Her faith had become a cornerstone in the foundation of the messianic line. But the New Testament writers were not content to simply mention her name in a genealogy. They wanted to explore the deeper meaning of her story, to understand what her faith represented in the larger narrative of redemption. Her name appeared again in the letter to the Hebrews in a chapter that has been called the Hall of Faith. Among the great heroes of faith, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, Rahab's name found its place. The author of Hebrews wrote that by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Her faith was held up as an example worthy of imitation, a model of what it meant to trust in God despite difficult circumstances. The description was honest about her past. She was called Rahab the prostitute, but it was also clear about her transformation. Her faith had changed everything. The woman who had once been defined by her profession was now defined by her faith. The woman who had once been known for her shame was now known for her salvation. James, the brother of Jesus, also found in Rahab's story a powerful illustration of the relationship between faith and works. He wrote that Rahab the prostitute was justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way. Her faith had been demonstrated through action, her belief proven through behavior. The apostles' words revealed something profound about the nature of true faith. It was not enough to simply believe in God. Faith had to be expressed through faithful action. Rahab's faith had moved her to risk everything to protect the spies, to trust in the God of Israel, even when it meant betraying her own people. Her story became a paradigm for understanding how faith worked in the lives of ordinary people. She was not a priest or a prophet, not a member of the religious establishment or a person of particular moral standing. She was a woman with a questionable past who had made a crucial choice at a crucial moment. The New Testament writers seem to delight in the radical nature of her inclusion. Here was a Gentile woman, a prostitute, a member of a pagan culture who had become an ancestor of the Messiah. Her story proclaimed that God's grace was available to all, regardless of background or circumstance. Her faith became a bridge between the Old and New Testaments, a connection between the God who had saved Israel from Egypt and the God who would save the world through Jesus Christ. The same divine grace that had rescued her from the falling walls of Jericho would one day rescue all humanity from the walls of sin and death. The scarlet cord that had marked her window for salvation became a symbol of the blood that would mark the cross for the salvation of the world. Her story pointed forward to the ultimate expression of divine love, the sacrifice that would make redemption available to all who would trust in God's grace. Christian teachers and preachers throughout the centuries would find in Rahab's story a source of hope and encouragement. Her name would be spoken from pulpits around the world, her faith held up as an example of what was possible when someone chose to trust in the God of impossible things. Her story became particularly meaningful to those who struggled with shame about their past. If God could use a prostitute from Jericho to become an ancestor of the Messiah, then surely no one was beyond the reach of divine grace. Her name became a promise that transformation was possible, that redemption was available, that new beginnings were within reach. The woman who had once hidden behind the walls of Jericho had become a light shining in the darkness, a beacon of hope for all who felt lost or forgotten. Her story had become scripture, her faith had become instruction, her name had become a blessing. In the pages of the New Testament, Rahab's story found its ultimate meaning. She was not just a woman who had helped some spies escape. She was a participant in the greatest rescue mission in history. Her faith had become part of the foundation upon which the church was built. Her courage had become part of the courage that would change the world. The scarlet cord that had once saved her family had become a thread in the tapestry of divine redemption that would cover the earth. Her story had become part of the eternal story of God's love for humanity, a story that would continue to unfold until the end of time. Symbolism of the scarlet cord. The scarlet cord that hung from Rahab's window was more than a practical marker for salvation. It was a symbol pregnant with meaning, a thread that connected her story to the larger tapestry of divine redemption. In its simple fibers were woven truths that would echo through the ages, revelations that would speak to the hearts of all who sought salvation. The color itself carried profound significance. Red, the color of life's blood, the color of sacrifice, the color of passion and power. When Rahab tied that cord to her window, she was unknowingly participating in a visual language that God had been using to speak to humanity since the beginning of time. The cord recalled another time when something red had marked a dwelling for salvation. In Egypt, centuries before Rahab's time, the Israelites had painted their doorposts with the blood of lambs, and the angel of death had passed over their homes. The same God who had saved Israel through the blood of the lamb was now saving Rahab through the sign of the scarlet cord. But the symbolism went deeper than mere color. The cord was a line of connection, a bridge between the old life and the new, between destruction and salvation, between death and life. When Rahab let the spies down through her window by that cord, she was literally lowering them to safety, but symbolically, she was creating a pathway to redemption. The cord became a testament to the power of faith to create connections where none had existed before. It connected a Canaanite woman to the God of Israel, a prostitute to the people of the promise, an outsider to the family of faith. In its simple fibers were woven the threads of inclusion and acceptance that would characterize the gospel message. The window where the cord hung was itself significant. Windows are openings, places where light enters, points of connection between the inside and the outside. Rahab's window had been her vantage point for watching the Israelite army, her portal for observing the workings of divine power. Now it became her doorway to salvation. The cord also spoke to the nature of divine grace. It was slender, seemingly fragile, apparently inadequate for the weight it would bear. Yet it held firm, proving that God's salvation did not depend on human strength or elaborate preparations. The simplest faith, the most basic trust, was sufficient to secure divine protection. The instructions the spies gave to Rahab about the cord revealed even more layers of meaning. The cord had to remain in the window, visible to all who passed by. Salvation was not a private matter. It required public declaration, visible commitment, open identification with the people of God. The cord also had to gather the family together. Salvation was not just individual, but communal. Rahab's faith would save not only herself, but all who sheltered under the protection of that scarlet sign. The cord became a symbol of how one person's faith could provide safety for many, how individual courage could create corporate blessing. The material of the cord, flax, the same plant from which linen was made, connected it to the sacred garments of the priests, to the fine fabrics used in the tabernacle, to the cloth that would one day wrap the body of Christ. Even in its humble function as a rope for lowering fugitives from a window, it carried echoes of holiness and consecration. The act of tying the cord in the window required Rahab to make a choice. She had to decide whether to trust the promises of the spies, whether to believe in the power of their God, whether to risk everything on the hope of salvation. The cord became a physical manifestation of her faith, a tangible expression of her trust in the invisible God. Through the centuries, theologians and teachers would find in that scarlet cord a preview of the cross. Just as the cord marked Rahab's house for salvation, the blood of Christ would mark believers for eternal life. Just as the cord was visible to the conquering army, the cross would be lifted up for all to see. Just as the cord saved Rahab's family from destruction, the cross would save God's family from sin and death. The cord pointed forward to other scarlet threads in the biblical narrative. The crimson thread that marked the hand of Zerah at his birth, identifying him as the firstborn twin. The red heifer, whose ashes would be used for purification. The scarlet wool that was part of the cleansing ritual for those healed of leprosy. Each red thread in Scripture seemed to echo the others, creating a pattern of redemption written in the language of color and symbol. The preservation of the cord's memory in Scripture suggested that God wanted this symbol to speak to future generations. The story was told and retold, passed down from parents to children, recorded by scribes and teachers. The cord became a teaching tool, a way of explaining the nature of salvation to those who came after. In Jewish tradition, the scarlet cord became associated with the thread of life that connected each person to their divine purpose. It represented the unbreakable bond between God and those who trusted in divine protection. The cord that had saved Rahab became a symbol of the covenant relationship that saved all who believed. Christian interpreters found in the cord a foreshadowing of the scarlet thread that would run through the entire New Testament, the theme of salvation through blood, of life through death, of redemption through sacrifice. The cord that hung from Rahab's window pointed toward the cross that would be raised on Calvary. The cord also became a symbol of hope for those who felt their lives were hanging by a thread. Just as Rahab's slender cord had proved strong enough to lower the spies to safety, God's grace was strong enough to hold believers secure no matter how precarious their circumstances might seem. In art and literature, the scarlet cord became a powerful image of divine protection. Painters depicted it glowing against the stone walls of Jericho, a bright line of hope in a scene of destruction. Writers used it as a metaphor for the thin but unbreakable connection between heaven and earth, between human need and divine provision. The cord reminded believers that salvation often came through the most ordinary means. It was not made of gold or silver, not crafted by skilled artisans or blessed by priests. It was simple rope, common cord, everyday material. Yet in God's hands, the ordinary became extraordinary, the common became sacred, the simple became sufficient. The story of the scarlet cord became a comfort to those who wondered if their faith was strong enough, their resources adequate enough, their standing secure enough. The cord proclaimed that God's salvation did not depend on human perfection, but on divine promise, not on human strength, but on divine faithfulness. The cord that had once marked a window in Jericho had become a symbol that would mark the hearts of believers throughout history. It spoke of a God who could be trusted to keep promises, who would honor faith even when it seemed foolish, who would provide salvation even in the most desperate circumstances. In the end, the scarlet cord became more than a symbol. It became a sacrament, a visible sign of invisible grace. It pointed beyond itself to the heart of God, to the nature of divine love, to the promise of redemption that would one day be fulfilled in the ultimate sacrifice of the ultimate Savior. The woman who had tied that cord to her window could never have imagined the depth of meaning it would carry, the generations it would teach, the hope it would inspire. But the God who guided her hands knew, and the cord became part of the eternal language of love that speaks across time and culture to every human heart that seeks salvation. Theological reflections. The story of Rahab opens windows into the deepest mysteries of divine character and human destiny. Her narrative becomes a lens through which we can examine the nature of grace, the meaning of faith, and the wonder of redemption. In her journey from the walls of Jericho to the genealogy of Christ, we discover truths that challenge our assumptions and expand our understanding of how God works in the world. Her story reveals a God who delights in choosing the unexpected. While human wisdom might have selected someone with a noble background and pristine reputation to play such a crucial role in salvation history, divine wisdom chose a prostitute from a doomed city. This choice declares something profound about the nature of divine election. It depends not on human merit, but on divine mercy. The theological implications stretch beyond individual salvation to encompass the very nature of how God builds the kingdom. Throughout Scripture, we see this pattern repeated: the younger chosen over the elder, the weak confounding the strong, the foolish things of the world shaming the wise. Rahab's inclusion in the messianic line establishes this principle from the very beginning of the genealogical record. Her faith demonstrates the mysterious relationship between divine sovereignty and human responsibility. The God who had already decreed Jericho's destruction still honored Rahab's choice to trust in divine mercy. Her decision mattered. Her faith made a difference. Her actions had consequences. The story suggests that divine sovereignty does not eliminate human agency, but rather creates space for it to flourish. The mercy shown to Rahab while judgment fell on Jericho reveals the complexity of divine justice. God is not arbitrary in the distribution of blessing and judgment, but neither is divine action limited by human categories of fairness. The same holy character that demanded judgment on Jericho's sin also provided a way of escape for those who would trust in divine protection. Her story illuminates the universal nature of sin and the universal availability of grace. Rahab was no worse than her neighbors in Jericho, but she was also no better. What distinguished her was not her moral superiority, but her willingness to trust in the God of Israel. This suggests that salvation is available to all, not because all deserve it, but because God offers it freely. The transformation of Rahab's identity speaks to the power of divine grace to create new beginnings. She was not merely forgiven for her past, she was given a new story to live. The woman who had been known as Rahab the prostitute became Rahab the faithful, Rahab the ancestor of kings, Rahab the example of faith. Grace does not simply erase the past, it redeems it and gives it new meaning. Her inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus suggests something profound about the nature of the Messiah who would come. Here was a Savior who would not be ashamed to be associated with the broken and the fallen, who would welcome into his family tree those whom others might have excluded. The genealogy proclaims that the gospel is for all people, regardless of background or circumstance. The preservation of her story in Scripture reveals something about divine priorities. God wanted future generations to know about Rahab, to learn from her example, to be encouraged by her transformation. Her story was not just historical record, but theological instruction, not just biography, but proclamation of divine character. Her faith demonstrates that trust in God does not require complete understanding. Rahab did not have access to the law of Moses, did not understand the complexities of Israelite theology, did not possess years of religious education. Yet her simple trust in what she had heard about the God of Israel was sufficient for salvation. Faith, the story suggests, is not about perfect knowledge, but about perfect trust. The courage she displayed in hiding the spies reveals the practical implications of faith. True belief in God necessarily leads to action, sometimes risky action that challenges social conventions and personal safety. Her story suggests that faith without works is indeed dead, that trust in God must be demonstrated through faithful living. Her integration into Israelite society points toward the ultimate inclusion of all nations in the people of God. Centuries before the Apostle Paul would write about Gentiles being grafted into the family of faith, Rahab's story was demonstrating the principle. She became a living proof that the God of Israel was also the God of all nations. The blessing that flowed through her lineage to future generations illustrates the far-reaching consequences of faithful choices. Her decision to trust in the God of Israel affected not only her own destiny, but the destiny of all who would come after her. Individual faith, her story suggests, has corporate implications that extend far beyond what we can imagine. Her story confronts our tendency to categorize people as worthy or unworthy of divine grace. If God could use a prostitute from Jericho to advance the cause of redemption, then no one is beyond the reach of divine love, and no one should be written off as unusable for divine purposes. The theological richness of her narrative continues to unfold as each generation discovers new depths of meaning in her story. She remains a powerful witness to the character of a God who specializes in transformation, who delights in redemption, who finds ways to bring beauty from ashes and hope from despair. In the end, Rahab's story is not just about one woman's remarkable journey. It is about the heart of God revealed through that journey. Her redemption points toward the ultimate redemption that would come through her descendant, Jesus Christ. Her salvation foreshadows the salvation that would be offered to all who would trust in the God who brings down walls and builds up faith. Rahab's cultural resonance across the centuries, Rahab's story has echoed through countless cultures and traditions, finding new voice in each generation that discovered her remarkable journey. Her narrative has transcended its original context to become a universal story of transformation, speaking to people of every background and circumstance who have struggled with questions of identity, belonging, and redemption. In Jewish tradition, Rahab became a symbol of the righteous convert, the outsider who chose to join the people of God. The rabbis told stories about her beauty and wisdom, her influence on the men of her generation, her role in preserving the lineage of David. Some traditions suggested that she married Joshua himself, making her even more central to the conquest narrative than the biblical text indicated. The Talmud recorded discussions about her character and motivations, with some sages arguing that her profession had been innkeeper rather than prostitute, while others embraced the more challenging interpretation. These debates reflected deeper questions about the nature of redemption and the kinds of people God chooses to use for divine purposes. Early Christian writers found in Rahab a powerful example of faith and conversion. Church fathers like Clement of Rome and Augustine used her story to illustrate the universal availability of divine grace. Her inclusion in the genealogy of Christ became a cornerstone in arguments for the inclusion of Gentiles in the Christian church. Medieval Christian art often depicted Rahab as a figure of the church itself, the former heathen bride who had been saved by divine love and brought into covenant relationship with God. In illuminated manuscripts and cathedral windows, she appeared alongside other biblical women, her scarlet cord transformed into a symbol of divine mercy. During the Protestant Reformation, Rahab's story took on new significance as theologians emphasized salvation by faith alone. Her simple trust in the God of Israel, demonstrated through her protection of the spies, became a model for understanding how faith worked in the lives of ordinary believers. She proved that salvation did not depend on religious background or moral perfection. In American literature, particularly during the 19th century, Rahab appeared in countless novels and poems as a symbol of redemption and second chances. Writers found in her story a powerful metaphor for the American ideal of reinvention, the belief that anyone could leave their past behind and create a new life in a new land. African American Spirituals and Sermons, often featured Rahab as an example of how God could lift up the lowly and use the despised things of the world to accomplish divine purposes. Her story resonated with communities that understood what it meant to be judged by others but claimed by God. Modern feminist theologians have reclaimed Rahab as a figure of female agency and courage. Rather than seeing her as a passive recipient of divine grace, they emphasize her active role in the conquest narrative, her strategic thinking, her leadership within her family, her negotiation skills with the spies. In contemporary popular culture, Rahab's story has been retold in novels, films, and television series. Each adaptation brings new interpretations and emphases, but the core themes of transformation and redemption remain constant. Her narrative continues to capture imaginations and challenge assumptions about the kinds of people God uses. Liberation theologians in Latin America have found in Rahab's story a model for understanding how God works through the marginalized and oppressed. Her position as a woman on the edges of society, her courage in opposing the established order, her faith in a God who promised justice, all of these elements speak to communities struggling for dignity and freedom. In cultures where shame and honor play central roles in social organization, Rahab's transformation from shame to honor provides a powerful alternative narrative. Her story suggests that divine grace can overcome even the deepest social stigma, that God's evaluation of human worth differs radically from human evaluation. Contemporary discussions about immigration and refugee resettlement often invoke Rahab's story as an example of how outsiders can become insiders, how strangers can become family. Her successful integration into Israelite society provides a model for welcoming those who seek safety and belonging in new communities. Rahab's story has been particularly meaningful to those working with women in prostitution or other forms of exploitation. Her narrative provides hope that no situation is so desperate that transformation is impossible, that no past is so dark that it cannot be redeemed. In interfaith dialogue, Rahab's story serves as a bridge between different religious traditions. Muslims honor her as a righteous woman who submitted to divine will. Jews celebrate her as a model convert. Christians see her as a forerunner of the gospel. Her story demonstrates how the same narrative can speak to different faith traditions while maintaining its essential character. The psychological dimensions of her story have attracted attention from counselors and therapists who work with trauma survivors. Her journey from fear to faith, from isolation to belonging, from shame to honor, provides a framework for understanding how healing and transformation can occur. In academic circles, Rahab's story has been analyzed from multiple perspectives: historical, literary, sociological, and theological. Each discipline brings its own tools and insights, but all recognize the remarkable power of her narrative to speak across cultural and temporal boundaries. The artistic legacy of Rahab's story continues to grow. Contemporary artists find in her narrative rich material for exploring themes of exile and belonging, transformation and identity, courage and faith. Her story provides a template for understanding how individual choices can have far-reaching consequences. Perhaps most significantly, Rahab's story continues to offer hope to those who feel that their past disqualifies them from a meaningful future. In a world that often seems to offer little grace for those who have made mistakes or faced difficult circumstances, her narrative proclaims that transformation is possible, that redemption is available, that new beginnings are within reach. Her cultural resonance testifies to the universal human longing for second chances, for acceptance despite past failures, for the possibility of starting over. Across cultures and centuries, people have seen in Rahab's story their own dreams of transformation and redemption, their own hopes for a future that is not limited by their past. The sun sets over the ancient walls of Jericho, now archaeological ruins that whisper of civilizations long past. Yet the story born within those walls continues to live, breathe, and speak to hearts across the world. Rahab's journey from the shadows of her old life to the bright promise of her new beginning remains as powerful today as it was 3,000 years ago. Her story challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about worthiness and redemption. In a world that often seems to measure people by their past mistakes, their social status, or their family background, Rahab's narrative proclaims a different truth. She reminds us that divine grace operates by different rules than human judgment, that God sees potential where others see only problems. The scarlet cord that once marked her window for salvation has become a thread that runs through all of human history. It speaks of hope for the hopeless, of second chances for those who thought their opportunities were gone, of divine love that reaches into the darkest places to bring light and life. As we consider her transformation from outsider to ancestor, from prostitute to matriarch, from the condemned to the celebrated, we are invited to examine our own stories. What walls surround our lives that seem impenetrable? What past mistakes cast shadows over our future possibilities? What fears hold us back from trusting in something greater than ourselves? Rahab's courage in that crucial moment when the spies came to her door echoes across the centuries. Her choice to trust in the God of Israel, despite the risks, despite her background, despite the uncertainty of the outcome, demonstrates the kind of faith that can change everything. Her story suggests that transformation often begins with a single decision: to trust, to hope, to believe that something better is possible. The integration of her family into the community of Israel speaks to our deepest longings for belonging. Her successful transition from enemy to family member, from outsider to insider, offers hope to all who have ever felt like strangers looking for a place to call home. Her story reminds us that true community is not based on shared backgrounds, but on shared faith, not on common pasts, but on common hopes. Her role in the lineage of David and ultimately of Christ reveals the mysterious ways that individual choices ripple through history. The woman who made a desperate bargain with foreign spies could never have imagined that her decision would affect the destiny of the world. Her story reminds us that our choices matter more than we know, that our faith can have consequences far beyond what we can see. The theological richness of her narrative continues to unfold as each generation discovers new depths of meaning in her journey. She remains a powerful witness to the character of a God who specializes in the impossible, who delights in using the unlikely, who finds ways to bring beauty from the most broken circumstances. Her cultural resonance across different traditions and time periods testifies to the universal power of her story. Whether viewed through Jewish, Christian, or secular lenses, her narrative speaks to fundamental human experiences: the longing for redemption, the hope for transformation, the dream of starting over. In our contemporary world filled with division and judgment, Rahab's story offers a different vision. She reminds us that no one is beyond the reach of divine grace, that everyone has the potential for transformation, that the most unlikely people can become heroes of faith. Her legacy lives on not just in the pages of Scripture, but in the lives of all who have found in her story the courage to trust, the hope to change, the faith to believe that their past does not have to determine their future. She stands as an eternal reminder that with God, all things are possible. As we close this exploration of her remarkable journey, we are left with wonder at the ways divine providence works through human choices. Rahab's story is not just ancient history. It is a living testament to the power of faith to transform lives, to change destinies, to write beautiful endings to broken stories. The woman who once watched from her window as the army of Israel marched below became part of the greatest story ever told. Her faith became part of the foundation upon which the kingdom of God was built. Her courage became part of the courage that would change the world. In the end, Rahab's story is an invitation to trust when trust seems foolish, to hope when hope seems groundless, to believe when belief seems impossible. She reminds us that the God who brought down the walls of Jericho is still in the business of bringing down walls, still writing stories of redemption, still offering second chances to all who will trust in divine grace. Her scarlet cord, once a simple rope hanging from a window, has become a symbol of the unbreakable connection between heaven and earth, between human need and divine provision, between what we were and what we can become. In her story, we find our story, the universal human tale of grace offered, faith exercised, and transformation accomplished. The woman who saved a nation by saving 2 spies continues to save hearts and lives through her enduring example of faith, courage, and hope. Her legacy is not just in her royal descendants, but in every person who has found in her story the inspiration to believe that change is possible, that redemption is available, that new beginnings are always within reach.